Welcome to the Thornwillow Centennial reading of Ulysses. We are celebrating James Joyce's literary masterpiece by presenting the entire novel through a tapestry of hundreds of video clips that unite readers across the world. Thank you for joining us. Episode 17, Ithaca. Featuring Joshua Kotin, reading from Princeton, New Jersey. Christopher Cerf, reading from New York and East Hampton. Bill Higgins, reading from San Sepolcro, Italy. Katherine Vaz, reading from East Hampton. Leslie Jamison, reading from Brooklyn. Clare Blackmer, reading from Providence. Stanley Spence, reading from Newburgh. Brien Lang, reading from Providence. Cynthia Ragona, also reading from Providence. Rodney Lopez, reading from East Providence. Geoff Griffin, also reading from East Providence. Rebecca Donner, reading from Oxford, England. Greg Luzitano, reading from Wakefield, Massachusetts. Mark Edward Hornish, reading from South Pasadena, California. Sarah Leibel, reading from Providence. Patty Marx, reading from New York. Eric Gilde, reading from Jackson Heights. Emma Froelich-Shea, reading from New York. Elspeth Green, also reading from New York. Derek Kaufman, reading from Greenwich. Jessica Breda, reading from New York. Frances Martindale, reading from Providence. Jonathan Walker, reading from New York. Chloe Dirksen, reading from Toronto, Canada. Francis Gasparini, reading from Sierra Madre, California. Patrick Macmanus, reading from Paris, France. Maud Ellmann, reading from Cambridge, England. Colin Bailey, reading from New York. Sheelagh Bevan, reading from New York. Michael Griffin, reading from Ennis, Ireland. Alan Adair, reading from Queens, New York. Philip Palmer, also reading from New York. And John Bidwell, reading from Princeton, New Jersey.
My name is Joshua Kotin. I'm at Special Collections at Firestone Library at Princeton University, which holds the Sylvia Beach papers. Here's a box from those papers, box 44. Box 44 contains proofs of Ulysses. I'm going to read the beginning of episode 17, Ithaca, from the proofs that Sylvia Beach received on January 19th, 1922. I can hold up the proofs. So here's the beginning of episode 17. What parallel courses did Bloom and Stephen follow returning? Starting united, both at normal walking pace, from Beresford Place, they followed in the order named Lower and Middle Gardner Streets, and Mountjoy Square, west. Then, at reduced pace, each bearing left, Gardner's Place, by an inadvertence, as far as the farther corner of Temple Street, north. Then, at reduced pace, with interruptions of halt, bearing right, Temple Street, north, as far as Hardwick Place. Approaching, disparate, at relaxed walking pace, they cross both the circus before George's Church diametrically, the chord in any circle being less than the arc which it subtends. Of what did they speak during their itinerary? Music, literature, Ireland, Dublin, Paris, friendship. Woman, prostitution, diet, the influence of gaslight, or the light of arc and glow lamps on the growth of adjoining periheliotropic trees, exposed corporation, emergency dust buckets, the Roman Catholic Church, ecclesiastical celibacy, the Irish nation, Jesuit education, careers, the study of medicine, the past day, Stevens's collapse. Did Bloom discover common factors of similarity between their respective like and unlike reactions to experience. Both were sensitive to artistic impressions, musical, in preference to plastic or pictorial. Both preferred a continental to an insular manner of life, a cisatlantic to a transatlantic place of residence. Both indurated by early domestic training and an inherited tenacity of heterodox resistance, professed their disbelief in many orthodox religious, national, social, and ethical doctrines. Both admitted that alternately stimulating and uptending influence of heterosexual magnetism. Were their views on some points divergent? Stephen dissented openly from Bloom's views on the importance of dietary and civic self-help, while Bloom dissented tacitly from Stevens's views on the eternal affirmation of the spirit of man in literature. Bloom assented covertly to Stevens's rectification of the anachronism involved in assigning the date of the conversion of the Irish nation to Christianity from Druidism by Patrick, son of Calpurnius, son of Pontitus, son of Odysseus, sent by Pope Celestine I in the year 432, in the reign of Leary, to the year 260, or thereabouts, in the reign of Cormac MacHart, death 266 AD, suffocated by imperfect deglution of ailment at Sletty and interned at Rosnaree. The collapse, which Bloom ascribed to gastric inundation and certain chemical compounds of varying degrees of adulteration and alcoholic strength, accelerated by mental exertion and the velocity of rapid circular motion in a relaxing atmosphere. Stephen attributed to the reapparition of the matutinal cloud, perceived by both from two different points of observation, Sandy Cove and Dublin, at first no bigger than a woman's hand. Was there one point on which their views were equal and negative? The influence of gaslight or electric light on the growth of adjoining trees. Had Bloom discussed similar subjects during nocturnal perambulations in the past? In 1844, with Owen Goldberg and Cecil Turnbull, at night on public thoroughfares between Longwood Avenue and Leonard's Corner and Sing Street and Bloomfield Avenue. In 1885, with Percy Apjohn, in the evenings, reclined against the wall between Gibraltar Villa and Bloomfield House in Crumlin, barony of Uppercross. In 1886, occasionally with casual acquaintances and prospective purchasers on doorsteps, in front of parlors and third-class railway carriages of suburban lines. In 1888, frequently with Major Brian Tweedy and his daughter, Miss Marian Tweedy, together and separately on the lounge in Matthew Dillon's house in Roundtown. Once in 1892 and once in 1893 with Julius Medatinsky. On both occasions in the parlor of his, Bloom's, house in Lombard Street, West. What reflection concerning the irregular sequence of dates, 1884, 1885, 1886, 1888, 1892, 1893, 1904, did Bloom make before their arrival at their destination? He reflected that the progressive extension of the field of individual development and experience was aggressively accompanied by a restriction of the converse domain of interindividual relations. As in what ways? From inexistence to existence, he came to many and was as one received. Existence with existence, he was with any as any with any. From existence to non-existence, gone, he would be by all as none perceived.
Hi, I'm Chris Cerf. I'm incredibly happy and proud to have been asked to be part of this Ulysses reading because my father, Ben Cerf, who co-founded Random House with his partner, Donald Fluffer, back in 1927, was the original publisher of Ulysses here in the United States. Most of Joyce's other works were in print here, but Ulysses had been banned for indecency, and my dad just thought he'd take a flyer on seeing if he could find a way to publish it. So he went to Paris, got Joyce to agree that if my dad could make it legal, Joyce would be happy to be at Random House, even though they were new for him to be the publisher. So my dad arranged for a copy of the book to be basically smuggled into the United States and captured by the customs people. There was a bit of a problem with that because it was such a hot day when the book arrived that the customs guy tried to wave the book through without seizing it. But the agent of Random House insisted that the book be seized, and it was. Came to trial, and Morris Ernst, the famous lawyer, won the case. So Random House did get to publish Ulysses, and it really put the company on the map. So we're standing here today, Ron. Before I do my reading, we decided to come here to Random House, the iconic Villard Mansion, where Random House was located from 1947 or so up till the very late 60s. They weren't here when Random House published Ulysses, and we wanted to go to the original building, but unfortunately it was torn down long ago to build the IBM building. So this is the iconic Random House, and it seemed like the perfect setting to set up this talk. So now I'll read from the Ithaca chapter. What did Bloom see on the range? On the right, smaller hob, a blue enamel saucepan. On the left, larger hob, a black iron kettle. What did Bloom do at the range? He removed the saucepan to the left hob, rose, and carried the iron kettle to the sink in order to tap the current by turning the faucet to let it flow. Did it flow? Yes. From Roundwood Reservoir in County Wicklow, of a cubic capacity of 2,400 million gallons, percolating through a subterranean aqueduct of filter mains of single and double pipage constructed at an initial plant cost of 5 pounds per linear yard by way of the Dargle, Rathdown, Glen of the Downs, and Callowhill to the 26-acre reservoir at Stillorgan, a distance of 22 statured miles, and thence through a system of relieving tanks by a gradient of 250 feet to the city boundary at Eustace Bridge, Upper Leeson Street, though from prolonged summer drought and daily supply of 12.5 million gallons, the water had fallen below the sill of the overflow weir, for which reason the borough surveyor and waterworks engineer, Mr. Spencer Hardy, C.E., on the instructions of the Waterworks Committee, had prohibited the use of municipal water for purposes other than those of consumption, envisaging the possibility of recourse being had to the impotable water of the Grand and Royal Canals, as in 1893. Particularly as the South Dublin Guardians, notwithstanding their ration of 15 gallons per day per pauper supplied to a 6-inch meter, had been convicted of a wastage of 20,000 gallons per night by a reading of their meter on the affirmation of the law agent of the corporation, Mr. Ignatius Rice, solicitor, thereby acting to the detriment of another section of the public, self-supporting taxpayers, solvent, sound. What in water did Bloom, water lover, drawer of water, water carrier, returning to the range, admire? Its universality, its democratic equality and constancy to its nature in seeking its own level, its vastness in the ocean of Mercator's projection, its unplumbed profundity in the sunken trench of the Pacific exceeding 8,000 fathoms. The restlessness of its waves and surface particles, visiting in turn all points of its seaboard. The independence of its units. The variability of states of sea. Its hydrostatic quiescence in calm, its hydrokinetic turgidity in neap and spring tides. Its subsidence after devastation. Its sterility in the circumpolar ice caps, Arctic and Antarctic. Its climactic and commercial significance. Its preponderance of 3-to-1 over the dry land of the globe. Its indisputable hegemony. Extending in square leagues over all the regions below the subequatorial Tropic of Capricorn. The multi-secular stability of its primeval basin. Its lucio-fulvous bed. Its capacity to dissolve and hold in solution all soluble substances, including millions of tons of the most precious metals. Its slow erosions of peninsulas and downward trending promontories. Its alluvial deposits. Its weight and volume and density. Its imperturbability in lagoons and highland tarns. Its gradations of color in the torrid and temperate and frigid zones. Its vehicular ramifications in continental lake-contained streams and confluent ocean-flowing rivers with their tributaries and transoceanic currents, Gulf Stream, north and south equatorial courses. Its violence in seaquakes, waterspouts, artesian wells, eruptions, torrents, eddies, freshets, baits, ground swells, watersheds, water partings, geysers, cataracts, whirlpools, maelstroms, inundations, deluges, cloudbursts. Its vast circumterrestrial ahorizontal curve. Its secrecy in springs and latent humidity revealed by rhabdomantic or hydrometric instruments and exemplified by the hole in the wall at Ashtown Gate, saturation of air, distillation of dew, the simplicity of its composition, 2 constituent parts of hydrogen with 1 constituent part of oxygen. Its healing virtues, its buoyancy in the waters of the Dead Sea, its persevering penetrativeness in runnels, gullies, inadequate dams, leaks on shipboard, its properties for cleansing, quenching thirst and fire, nourishing vegetation, its infallibility as paradigm and paragon, its metamorphoses as vapor, mist, cloud, rain, sleet, snow, hail, its strength in rigid hydrants, its variety of forms in luffs and bay, its variety of forms in lucks and bays and gulfs and bights and guts and lagoons and atolls and archipelagos and sounds and fjords and minches and tidal estuaries and arms of sea. Its solidity in glaciers, icebergs, ice flows. Its facility in working hydraulic mill wheels, turbines, dynamos, electric power stations, bleach works, tanneries, scotch mills. Its utility in canals, rivers, if navigable, floating and graving docks. Its potentiality derivable from harnessed tides or watercourses falling from level to level. Its submarine fauna and flora, an acoustic photophobe, numerically, if not literally, the inhabitants of the globe. Its ubiquity as constituting 90% of the human body. The noxiousness of its effluvia in lacustrine marshes, pestilential fens, faded flower water, stagnant pools in the waning moon.
My name is William Higgins. I'm a book collector by avocation and an historic preservationist by profession, with a particular love for the life of cities over time. There's probably no place in literature where that urban theme unfolds as forcefully as it does in Ulysses. Joyce wrote much of the book while he was far away from the city that lives in its pages, while he was in Italy. So maybe it's fitting that I'm reading this small piece of it from the hills of Tuscany, where Dublin feels like the distant figment of a fertile imagination. What did Bloom see on the range? On the right, smaller hob, a blue enameled saucepan. On the left, larger hob, a black iron kettle. What did Bloom do at the range? He removed the saucepan to the left hob, rose and carried the iron kettle to the sink in order to tap the current by turning the faucet to let it flow. Did it flow? Yes, from Roundwood Reservoir in County Wicklow, of a cubic capacity of 2,400 million gallons, percolating through a subterranean aqueduct, of filter mains of single and double pipage, constructed at an initial plant cost of £5 per linear yard, by way of the Dargle, Rathdown, Glen of the Downs, and Callow Hill, to the 26-acre reservoir at Stillorgan, a distance of 22 statute miles, and thence through a system of relieving tanks by a gradient of 250 feet to the city boundary at Eustace Bridge, Upper Leeson Street, though from prolonged summer drought and daily supply of 12.5 million gallons, the water had fallen below the sill of the overflow weir, for which reason the borough surveyor and waterworks engineer, Mr. Spencer Harty, C.E., on the instructions of the Waterworks Committee, had prohibited the use of municipal water for purposes other than those of consumption, envisaging the possibility of recourse being had to the impotable water of the Grand and Royal Canals, as in 1893, particularly as the South Dublin Guardians, notwithstanding their ration of 15 gallons per day per pauper, supplied through a 6-inch meter, had been convicted of a wastage of 20,000 gallons per night by a reading of their meter on the affirmation of the law agent of the corporation, Mr. Ignatius Rice, solicitor, thereby acting to the detriment of another section of the public, self-supporting taxpayers, solvent, sound. What in the water did Bloom, water lover, drawer of water, water carrier, returning to the range, admire? Its universality, its democratic equality and constancy to its nature in seeking its own level, its vastness in the ocean of Mercator's projection, its unplumbed profundity in the Sundom Trench of the Pacific, extending 8,000 fathoms, the restlessness of its waves and surface particles, visiting in turn all points of its seaboard, the independence of its units, the variability of states of sea, its hydrostatic quiescence in calm, its hydrokinetic turgidity in neap and spring tides, its subsistence after devastation, its sterility in the circumpolar ice caps, Arctic and Antarctic, its climatic and commercial significance, its preponderance of 3-to-1 over the dry land of the globe, its indisputable hegemony extending its square leagues over all the region below the sub-equatorial Tropic of Capricorn, the multi-secular stability of its primeval basin, its luteofulvous bed, its capacity to dissolve and hold in solution all soluble substances, including millions of tons of the most precious metals, its slow erosions of peninsulas and downward tending promontories, its alluvial deposits, its weight and volume and density, its imperturbability in lagoons and highland tarns, its gradation of colors in the torrid and temperate and frigid zones, its vehicular ramifications in continental, lake-contained streams and confluent, ocean-flowing rivers with their tributaries and transoceanic currents, Gulf Stream, north and south equatorial courses, its violence in seaquakes, waterspouts, artesian wells, eruptions, torrents, eddies, freshets, spates, ground swells, watersheds, water partings, geysers, cataracts, whirlpools, maelstroms, inundations, deluges, cloudbursts, its vast circumterrestrial ahorizontal curve, its secrecy in springs, and latent humidity, revealed by rhabdomatic or hygrometric instruments and exemplified by the hole in the wall at Ashtown Gate. Saturation of air, distillation of dew, the simplicity of its composition, 2 constituent parts of hydrogen with 1 constituent part of oxygen. Its healing virtues, its buoyancy in the waters of the Dead Sea, its persevering penetrativeness in runnels, gullies, inadequate dams, leaks on shipboard, its properties for cleansing, quenching thirst and fire, nourishing vegetation, its infallibility as paradigm and paragon, its metamorphoses as vapor, mist, cloud, rain, sleet, snow, hail, its strength in rigid hydrants, its variety of forms in loughs and bays and gulfs and bights and guts and lagoons and atolls and archipelagos and sounds and fjords and minches and tidal estuaries and arms of the sea. Its solidity in glaciers, icebergs, ice flows, its docility in working hydraulic mill wheels, turbines, dynamos, electric power stations, bleach works, tanneries, scutch mills. Its utility in canals, rivers, if navigable, floating and graving docks, its potentiality derivable from harnessed tides or watercourses falling from level to level, its submarine fauna and flora, anacoustic, photophobe, numerically, if not literally, the inhabitants of the globe. Its ubiquity as constituting 90% of the human body, the noxiousness of its effluvia in lacustrine marshes, pestilential fens, faded flower water, stagnant pools in the waning moon.
I'm Katherine Vaz. I'm a novelist and short story writer. My first time reading Ulysses was as an undergrad with the OED by my side. I had no idea in the twice more I've read it that one day I could say that my father-in-law, Bennett Cerf, would be the publisher of this beloved book. I'm happy to be reading from the Ithaca chapter, which of course is a riff on the old Baltimore Catechism, which I also remember. Having set the half-filled kettle on the now burning coals, why did he return to the still flowing tap? To wash his soiled hands with a partially consumed tablet of Barrington's lemon-flavored soap, to which paper still adhered, bought 13 hours previously for 4d and still unpaid for, in fresh, cold, never-changing, ever-changing water, and dry them, face and hands, in a long, red-bordered Holland cloth passed over a wooden revolving roller. What reason did Stephen give for declining Bloom's offer? That he was hydrophobe, hating partial contact by immersion, or total by submersion in cold water, his last bath having taken place in the month of October of the preceding year, disliking the aqueous substances of glass and crystal, distrusting aquosities of thought and language. What impeded Bloom from giving Stephen counsels of hygiene and prophylactic, to which should be added suggestions concerning a preliminary wetting of the head and contraction of the muscles with rapid splashing of the face and neck and thoracic and epigastric region in case of sea or river bathing, the parts of the human anatomy most sensitive to cold being the nape, stomach, and thenar or sole of foot, the incompatibility of aquosity with the erratic originality of genius. What additional didactic counsels did he similarly repress? Dietary, concerning the respective percentage of protein and caloric energy in bacon, saltling, and butter, the absence of the former in the last named, and the abundance of the latter in the first named. Which seemed to the host to be the predominant qualities of his guest? Confidence in himself, an equal and opposite power of abandonment and recuperation. What concomitant phenomenon took place in the vessel of liquid by the agency of fire? The phenomenon of ebullition, fanned by constant updraft of ventilation between the kitchen and the chimney flue. Ignition was communicated from the faggots of pre-combustible fuel to the polyhedral masses of bituminous coal containing in compressed mineral form the foliated, fossilized decidua of primeval forests, which had in turn derived their vegetative existence from the sun, primal source of heat, radiant, transmitted through omnipresent, luminiferous, diatherminous ether. Heat, convected, and mode of motion developed by such combustion was constantly and increasingly conveyed from the course of calorification to the liquid contained in the vessel, being radiated through the uneven, unpolished, dark surface of the metal iron, in part reflected, in part absorbed, in part transmitted, gradually raising the temperature of the water from normal to boiling point, a rise in temperature expressible as the result of an expenditure of 72 thermal units needed to raise 1 pound of water from 50 degrees to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. What announced the accomplishment of this rise in temperature? A double falciform ejection of water vapor from under the kettle lid at both sides simultaneously. For what personal purpose could Bloom have applied the water so boiled? To shave himself. What advantages attended shaving by night? A softer beard, a softer brush, if intentionally allowed to remain from shave to shave in its agglutinated lather, a softer skin, if unexpectedly encountering female acquaintances in remote places at incustomary hours, quiet reflections upon the course of the day, a cleaner sensation when awaking after a fresher sleep, since matutinal noises, premonitions, and perturbations, a clattered milk can, a postman's double knock, a paper read, reread while lathering, relathering the same spot, a shock, a shoot, with thought of aught he sought, though fraught with naught, might cause a faster rate of shaving and a nick, on which incision plaster with precision cut and humected and applied, adhered, which was to be done. Why did absence of light disturb him less than presence of noise? Because of the surety of the sense of touch in his firm, full, masculine, feminine, passive, active hand. What quality did it, his hand, possess, but with what counteracting influence? The operative surgical quality, but that he was reluctant to shed human blood even when the end justified the means, preferring in their natural order heliotherapy, psychophysicotherapeutics, osteopathic surgery.
What lay under exposure on the lower middle and upper shelves of the kitchen dresser opened by Bloom? On the lower shelf, 5 vertical breakfast plates, 6 horizontal breakfast saucers on which rested inverted breakfast cups, a mustache cup, an inverted and saucer of Crown Derby, 4 white gold-rimmed egg cups, an open chamois purse displaying coins, mostly copper, and a phial of aromatic violet comfits. On the middle shelf, a chipped egg cup containing pepper, a drum of table salt, 4 conglomerated black olive skin oleaginous paper, an empty pot of Plumtree's potted meat, an oval wicker basket bedded with fiber and containing 1 Jersey pear, a half-empty bottle of William Gilby & Co.'s white invalid port, half disrobed of its swath of coral pink tissue paper, a packet of Epps soluble cocoa, 5 ounces of Anne Lynch's choice tea at 2 per pound in a crinkled lead paper bag, a cylindrical canister containing the best crystallized lump sugar, 2 onions, one the larger, Spanish, entire, the other, smaller, Irish, bisected with augmented surface and more redolent, a jar of Irish model dairies cream, a jug of brown crockery containing a naggin and a quarter of soured adulterated milk, converted by heat into water, acidulous serum, and semi-solidified curds, which added to the quantity subtracted for Mr. Bloom's and Mrs. Fleming's breakfast made 1 imperial pint, the total quantity originally delivered. 2 cloves, a halfpenny, and a small dish containing a slice of fresh rib steak. On the upper shelf, a battery of jam jars of various sizes and proveniences. What attracted his attention lying on the apron of the dresser? 4 polygonal fragments of 2 lacerated scarlet betting tickets, numbered 887, 886. What reminiscences temporarily corrugated his brow? Reminiscences of coincidences? Truth stranger than fiction, pre-indicative of the result of the Gold Cup flat handicap, the official and definitive result of which he had read in the Evening Telegraph, late pink edition, in the cabman's shelter at Buttbridge. Where had previous intimations of the result, affected or projected, been received by him? In Bernard Kiernan's licensed premises 8, 9, and 10 in Little Britain Street, in David Byrne's licensed premises 14 Duke Street, in O'Connell Street Lower outside Graham Lemon's when a dark man had placed in his hand a throwaway, subsequently thrown away, advertising Elijah, restorer of the church in Zion. In Lincoln Place outside the premises of F.W. Swenny & Co., Limited, dispensing chemists, when Frederick N. Bantam Lyons had rapidly and successively requested, perused, and restituted the copy of the current issue of the Freeman's Journal and National Press, which he had been about to throw away, subsequently thrown away, he had proceeded towards the oriental edifice of the Turkish and Warm Baths, 11 Leinster Street, with the light of inspiration shining in his countenance and bearing in his arms the secret of the race, graven in the language of prediction. What qualifying considerations allayed his perturbations? The difficulties of interpretation, since the significance of any event followed its occurrence as variably as the acoustic report followed the electrical discharge, and of counterestimating against an actual loss by failure to interpret the total sum of possible losses proceeding originally from a successful interpretation. His mood? He had not risked. He did not expect. He had not been disappointed. He was satisfied. What satisfied him? To have sustained no positive loss, to have brought a positive gain to others, light to the Gentiles. How did Bloom prepare a collation for a Gentile? He poured into 2 teacups 2 level spoonfuls, 4 in all, of Epps-soluble cocoa, and proceeded according to the directions for use printed on the label, to each adding, after sufficient time for infusion, the prescribed ingredients for diffusion in the manner and in the quantity prescribed. What supererogatory marks of special hospitality did the host show his guest? Relinquishing his symbiosical right to the mustache cup of imitation Crown Derby presented to him by his only daughter, Millicent, Millie, he substituted a cup identical with that of his guest and served extraordinarily to his guest and, in reduced measure to himself, the viscous cream ordinarily reserved for the breakfast of his wife Marion, Molly. Was the guest conscious of, and did he acknowledge these marks of hospitality? His attention was directed to them by his host jocosely, and he accepted them seriously as they drank in joco-serious silence Epps' mass product, the creature cocoa.
Hello there, my name is Clare Blackmer, and I'm coming to you from Providence, Rhode Island. Were there marks of hospitality which he contemplated but suppressed, reserving them for another and for himself on future occasions, to complete the act begun? The reparation of a fissure of the length of 1 1/2 inches in the right side of his guest's jacket, a gift to his guest of one of the four ladies' handkerchiefs, if and when ascertained to be in a presentable condition. Who drank more quickly? Bloom, having the advantage of 10 seconds at the initiation and taking, from the concave surface of a spoon along the handle of which a steady flow of heat was conducted. 3 sips to his opponent's 1, 6 to 2, 9 to 3. What cerebration accompanied his frequentative act? Concluding by inspection, but erroneously, that his silent companion was engaged in mental composition, he reflected on the pleasures derived from literature of instruction rather than of amusement, as he himself had applied to the works of William Shakespeare more than once for the solution of difficult problems in imaginary or real life. Had he found their solution? In spite of careful and repeated reading of certain classical passages, aided by a glossary, he had derived imperfect conviction from the text, the answers not bearing in all points. What lines concluded his first piece of original verse written by him, potential poet, at the age of 11 in 1877 on the occasion of the offering of 3 prizes by the Shamrock, a weekly newspaper? An ambition to squint at my verses in print makes me hope that for these you'll find room. If you so condescend, then please place at the end the name of yours truly, L. Bloom. Did he find 4 separating forces between his temporary guest and him? Name, age, race, creed. What anagrams had he made on his name in youth? Leopold Bloom, Elpod Behul, Moldopeloob, Bollop Idum, Old Olabo MP. What acrostic upon the abbreviation of his first name had he, kinetic poet, sent to Miss Marion Tweedy on the 14th February, 1888? Poets oft have sung in rhyme of music sweet, their praise divine. Let them hymn it 9 times 9, dearer far than song or wine. You are mine, the world is mine. What had prevented him from completing a topical song, music by R.J. Johnston, on the events of the past, or fixtures for the actual years, entitled If Brian Boru Could Come Back and See Old Dublin Now, commissioned by Michael Gunn, lessee of the Gaiety Theatre, 46, 47, 48, 49 South King Street, and to be introduced into the 6th scene, the Valley of Diamonds, of the 2nd edition, 30th January 1893, of the grand annual Christmas pantomime Sinbad the Sailor, written by Greenleaf Whittier, scenery by George A. Jackson and Cecil Hicks, costumes by Mrs. and Miss Whalen, produced by R. Shelton, 26 December 1892, under the personal supervision of Mrs. Michael Gunn, ballets by Jessie Noir, harlequinade by Thomas Otto, and sung by Nellie Bouverist, principal girl. Firstly, oscillation between the events of imperial and of local interest, the anticipative Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria, born 1820, acceded 1837, and the post-dissipated opening of the new municipal fish market. Secondly, apprehension of opposition from extreme circles on the questions of the respective visits of their Royal Highnesses, the Duke and Duchess of York, real, and of His Majesty King Brian Boru, imaginary. Thirdly, a conflict between professional etiquette and professional emulation concerning the recent erections of the Grand Lyric Hall on Burgh Quay and the Theatre Hall in Hawkins Street. Fourthly, distraction resultant from compassion for Nellie Bouverist's non-intellectual, non-political, non-topical expression of countenance and concupiscence caused by Nellie Bouverist's revelations of white articles of non-intellectual, non-political, non-topical underclothing, while she, Nellie Bouverist, was in the articles. Fifthly, the difficulties of the selection of appropriate music and humorous allusions from Everybody's Book of Jokes, 1,000 pages and a laugh on every one. Sixthly, the rhymes homophonous and cacophonous, associated with the names of the new Lord Mayor, Daniel Tollin, the new High Sheriff, Thomas Pyle, and the new Solicitor General, Dunbar Plunkett Barton.
Hello, my name is Stanley Spence. I'm currently an intern at Thornwillow in the summer of 2023. I'm actually in my apartment at the Thornwillow Makers Village right now, and I'm very excited to be reading for you guys, so here we go. What relation existed between their ages? 16 years before, in 1888, when Bloom was of Stephen's present age, Stephen was 6. 16 years after, in 1920, when Stephen would be of Bloom's present age, Bloom would be 54. In 1936, when Bloom would be 70 and Stephen 54, their ages initially in the ratio of 16 to 0 would be as 17.5 to 13.5. The proportion increasing and the disparity diminishing, according arbitrary as future years were added. For if the proportion existing in 1883 had continued immutable, conceiving that to be possible, till then 1904, when Stephen was 22, Bloom would be 374, and in 1920, when Stephen would be 38, as Bloom then was, Bloom would be 646, while in 1952, when Stephen would have attained the maximum post-diluvian age of 70, Bloom, being 1,190 years alive, having been born in the year 714, would have surpassed by 221 years the maximum antediluvian age, that of Methuselah, 969 years. While, if Stephen would continue to live until he would attain that age in the year 3072 AD, Bloom would have been obliged to have been alive 83,300 years, having been obliged to have been born in the year 81,396 BC. What events might nullify these calculations? The cessation of existence of both or either, the inauguration of a new era or calendar, the annihilation of the world and consequent extermination of the human species, inevitable but unpredictable. How many previous encounters prove their pre-existing acquaintance? 2. The first in the lilac garden of Matthew Dillon's house, Medina Villa, Kimmage Road, Round Town, in 1887, in the company of Stephen's mother, Stephen being then of the age of 5 and reluctant to give his hand in salutation. The second in the coffee room of Breslin's Hotel on a rainy Sunday in the January of 1892, in the company of Stephen's father and Stephen's granduncle, Stephen being then 5 years older. Did Bloom accept the invitation to dinner given then by the son and afterwards seconded by the father? Very gratefully, with grateful appreciation, with sincere appreciative gratitude, in appreciatively grateful sincerity of regret, he declined. Did their conversation on the subject of these reminiscences reveal a third connecting link between them? Mrs. Reardon, a widow of independent means, had resided in the house of Stephen's parents from the 1st of September, 1888, to the 29th of December, 1891, and had also resided during the years 1892, 1893, and 1894 in the City Arms Hotel, owned by Elizabeth Adode of 54 Prussia Street, where during parts of the years 1893 and 1894, she had been a constant informant of Bloom, who resided also in the same hotel, being at that time a clerk in the employment of Joseph Cuff of 5 Smithfield for the superintendence of sales in the adjacent Dublin Cattle Market on North Circular Road. Had he performed any special corporal work of mercy for her? He had sometimes propelled her, on warm summer evenings, an infirm widow of independent if limited means, in her convalescent bath chair, with slow revolutions of its wheels, as far as the corner of the North Circular Road opposite Mr. Gavin Lowe's place of business, where she had remained for a certain time, scanning through his one-lensed binocular field glasses, unrecognizable citizens on tramcars, roadster bicycles, equipped with inflated pneumatic tires, hackney carriages, tandems, private and hired landaus, dog carts, pony traps, and brakes, passing from the city to the Phoenix Park, and vice versa. Why could he then support that, his vigil, with the greater equanimity? Because in middle youth he had often sat, observing through a rondel of bossed glass, of a multicolored pane, the spectacle, offered with continual changes of the thoroughfare without, pedestrians, quadrupeds, velocipedes, vehicles, passing slowly, quickly, evenly, round and round and round, the rim of a round, precipitous globe. What distinct different memories had each of her now 8 years deceased? The older, her bezique cards encounters, her Skye Terrier, her supposititious wealth, her lapses of responsiveness and incipient catarrhal deafness. The younger, her lamp of colza oil before the statue of the Immaculate Conception, her green and maroon brushes for Charles Stuart Parnell, and for Michael Davitt, her tissue papers. Thank you very much. On to the next.
Hello, my name is Brien Lang. I'm coming to you from Providence, Rhode Island, where I am a resident artist and the director of new works at the Wilbur Theater Group. And as an undergraduate English and philosophy major at Boston College, I read Ulysses a lot. Okay. Were there no means still remaining to him to achieve the rejuvenation which these reminiscences divulged to a younger companion rendered the more desirable? The indoor exercises, formerly intermittently practiced, subsequently abandoned, prescribed in Eugene Sando's Physical Strength and How to Obtain It, which, designed particularly for commercial men engaged in sedentary occupation, were to be made with mental concentration in front of a mirror, so as to bring into play the various families of muscles and to produce successively a pleasant relaxation and the most pleasant representation of juvenile agility. Had any special agility been his earlier in youth, the ring weight lifting had been beyond his strength, and the full circle gyration beyond his courage, yet as a high school scholar, he had excelled in his stable and protracted execution of the half-lever movement on the parallel bars, in consequence of his abnormally developed abdominal muscles. Did either openly allude to their racial differences? Neither. What reduced to their simplest reciprocal form were Bloom's thoughts about Stephen's thoughts, about Bloom about Stephen's thoughts, about Bloom's thoughts about Stephen. He thought that he was a Jew, whereas he knew that he knew that he knew that he was not. What, the enclosures of reticence removed, were their respective parentages. Bloom, only born male transubstantial heir of Rudolf Virchow, subsequently Rudolf Bloom, of Sambale, Vienna, Budapest, Milan, London, and Dublin, and of Eileen Higgins, second daughter of Julius Higgins, John Corelli, and Fanny Higgins, born Fowey. Stephen, oldest surviving male consubstantial heir of Simon Dedalus of Cork and Dublin, and of Mary, daughter of Richard and Christina Golding, born Green. Had Bloom and Stephen been baptized? And where? And by whom? Cleric or layman? Bloom, 3 times, by the Reverend Mr. Gilbert Johnston, M.A., alone in the Protestant Church of St. Nicholas, without whom, by James O'Connor, Philip Gilligan, and James Fitzpatrick, together, under a pump in the village of Swords, and by the Reverend Charles Malone, C.C., in the Church of the Three Patrons, Bathgar. Stephen, once, by the Reverend Charles Malone, C.C., alone, in the Church of the Three Patrons, Rathgar. Did they find their educational careers similar? Submitting Stephen for Bloom, Stoom, did they find their educational careers similar? Submitting Stephen for Bloom, Stoom, would have passed successively through a Dane school and the high school. Substituting Bloom for Stephen, Bleven, would have passed successively through the preparatory, junior, middle, and senior grades of the intermediate and through the matriculation, first arts, second arts, and arts degree courses of the Royal University. Why did Bloom refrain from stating that he had frequented the University of Life? Because of his fluctuating incertitude as to whether this observation had or had not been already made by him to Stephen, or by Stephen to him. What two temperaments did they individually represent? The scientific, the artistic. What proofs did Bloom adduce to prove that his tendency was towards applied rather than towards pure science? Certain possible inventions of which he had cogitated when reclining in a state of supine repletion, to a digestion stimulated by his appreciation of the importance of the inventions, now common but once revolutionary. For example, the aeronautic parachute, the reflecting telescope, the spiral corkscrew, the safety pin, the mineral water siphon, the canal lock with winch and sluice, the suction pump. Were these inventions principally intended for an improved scheme of kindergarten? Yes, rendering obsolete pop guns, elastic air bladders, games of hazard, catapults. They compromised astronomical kaleidoscope exhibiting the 12 constellations of the zodiac from Aries to Pisces, miniature mechanical orreries, arithmetical gelatine lozenges, geometrical to correspond with zoological biscuits, globe map playing balls, historically costumed dolls.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Ragona. I live in Providence, Rhode Island. I was a college English major. I'm a very avid reader, and I remain very active in children's literature. I'm a elementary and middle school library volunteer. I am on an organizing committee for a diverse book festival for kids, and I'm beginning to get quite active in our Rhode Island activities to combat book banning. And while I am an active reader of, I guess, primarily, literary fiction, this is my first Ulysses, and I think my first Joyce. And after looking at page 636, and working my way through it, I feel vindicated that this is a lot, and maybe not for me, but here goes. What also stimulated him in his cogitations? The financial success achieved by Ephraim Marx and Charles A. James, the former by his penny bazaar at 42 George's Street South, the latter at his sixpence halfpenny shop and World's Fancy Fair and waxwork exhibition at 30 Henry Street, admission 2 pence, children a penny, and the infinite possibilities hitherto unexploited of the modern art of advertisement, if condensed in trilateral monoidal symbols, vertically of maximum visibility, divined, horizontally of maximum legibility, deciphered, and of magnetizing efficacy to arrest involuntary attention, to interest, to convince, to decide. Such as K11, Kino's 11, Shilling Trousers, House of Keys, Alexandra J. Keys. Such as not. Look at this long candle. Calculate when it burns out, and you receive gratis 1 pair of our special non-compo boots. Guaranteed 1 candle power. Address, Barclay & Cook, 18 Talbot Street. Basilicule, insect powder. Very best, boot blacking. You want it? Combined pocket 2-blade penknife with corkscrew, nail file, and pipe cleaner. Such as never? What is home without plum trees, potted meat? Incomplete. With it, an abode of bliss. Manufactured by George Plumtree, 23 Merchants Quay, Dublin, put up in 4-ounce pots, and inserted by Councillor Joseph P. Nanetti, MP, Rotunda Ward, 19 Hardwick Street, under the obituary notices and anniversaries of deceases. The name on the label is Plumtree, a plum tree in a meat pot, registered trademark. Beware of imitations. Peat Mott, Trumply, Montpat, Plemtrue. Which example did he adduce to induce Stephen to deduce that originality, though producing its own reward, does not invariably conduce to success? His own ideated and rejected project of an illuminated show-cart, drawn by a beast of burden, in which two smartly dressed girls were to be seated engaged in writing. What suggested scene was then constructed by Stephen? Solitary hotel in Mountain Pass. Autumn. Twilight. Firelit. In dark corner, young man seated. Young woman enters, restless, solitary. She sits. She goes to window. She stands. She sits. Twilight. She thinks. On solitary hotel paper she writes. She thinks. She writes. She sighs. Wheels and hoofs. She hurries out. He comes from his dark corner. He seizes solitary paper. He holds it towards fire. Twilight. He reads. Solitary. What? In sloping, upright and back hands. Queen's Hotel. Queen's Hotel. What suggested scene was then reconstructed by Bloom? The Queen's Hotel, Ennis, County Clare, where Rudolph Bloom, Rudolph Verrag, died on the evening of the 27th June, 1886, at some hour unstated, in consequence of an overdose of monkshood, aconite, self-administered in the form of a neuralgic liniment, composed of 2 parts of aconite liniment to 1 of chloroform liniment, purchased by him at 10:20 a.m. on the morning of 27th June, 1886, at the Medical Hall of Francis Dennehy, 17 Church Street, Ennis, after having, though not in consequence of having, purchased at 3:15 p.m. on the afternoon of 27th June, 1886, a new Boater straw hat, extra smart, after having, though not in consequence of having, purchased at the hour and in the place aforesaid, the toxin aforesaid, at the general drapery store of James Cullen, 4 Main Street, Ennis. Did he attribute this homonymity to information or coincidence or intuition? Coincidence. Did he depict the scene verbally for his guests to see? He preferred himself to see another's face and listen to another's words, by which potential narration was realized and kinetic temperament relieved.
Hi, I'm Rodney Lopez, and I'm coming to you from East Providence, Rhode Island. And I'm happy to read this passage of Ulysses. I don't have a beautiful copy of the book to read from, however, I do have a lovely printout of a PDF. All right, here goes. Did he see only a second coincidence in the second scene narrated to him, described by the narrator as a Pisgah of Palestine, or the parable of the plums? It, with the preceding scene and with others unnarrated but existent by implication, to which add essays on various subjects or moral apothegms. For example, My Favorite Hero, or Procrastination is the Thief of Time, composed during school years, seemed to him to contain in itself and in conjunction with the personal equation certain possibilities of financial, social, personal, and sexual success, whether specially collected and selected as model pedagogy themes of cent per cent merit for the use of preparatory and junior grade students, or contributed in printed form, following the precedent of Philip Beaufoy or Dr. Dick or Heblin's Studies in Blue, to a publication of certified circulation and solvency, or employed verbally as intellectual stimulation for sympathetic auditors, tacitly appreciative of successful narrative and confidently augurative of successful achievement during the increasingly longer nights gradually following the summer solstice on the day but 3 following the Delicet, Tuesday, 21st of June, S. Aloysius Gonzaga, sunrise 3:33 a.m., sunset 8:29 p.m. Which domestic problem as much as, if not more than, any other frequently engaged his mind? What to do with our wives? What had been his hypothetical singular solutions? Parlor games, dominoes, halma, tiddlywinks, spillikins, cup and ball, nap, spoil 5, bezique, 25, beggar my neighbor, drafts, chess or backgammon, embroidery, darning or knitting for the Police-Aided Clothing Society, musical duets, mandolin and guitar, piano and flute, guitar and piano, legal scrivenery or envelope addressing, bi-weekly visits to variety entertainments, commercial activity as pleasantly commanding and pleasingly obeyed mistress proprietress in a cool dairy shop or warm cigar divan, the clandestine satisfaction of erotic irritation in masculine brothels, state inspected and medically controlled, social visits at regular, infrequent, prevented intervals and with regular, frequent, preventive superintendence to and from female acquaintances of recognized respectability in the vicinity, courses of evening instruction specially designed to render liberal instruction agreeable. What instances of deficient mental development in his wife inclined him in favor of the last mentioned ninth solution? In disoccupied moments, she had more than once covered a sheet of paper with signs and hieroglyphics, which she stated were Greek and Irish and Hebrew characters. She had interrogated constantly at varying intervals as to the correct method of writing the capital initial of the name of a city in Canada, Quebec. She understood little of political complications, internal, or balance of power external. In calculating the addenda of bills, she frequently had recourse to digital aid. After completion of laconic epistolary compositions, she abandoned the implement of calligraphy in the acoustic pigment exposed to the corrosive action of copperas, green vitriol, and nutgall. Unusual polysyllables of foreign origin she interpreted phonetically, or by false analogy, or by both. Metempsychosis, met him pychoses, alias, a mendacious person mentioned in sacred scripture. What compensated in the false balance of her intelligence for these and such deficiencies of judgment regarding persons, places, and things? The false apparent parallelism of all perpendicular arms of all balances proved true by construction. The counterbalance of her proficiency of judgment regarding one person proved true by experiment. How had he attempted to remedy this state of comparative ignorance? Variously, by leaving in a conspicuous place a certain book open at a certain page, by assuming in her, when alluding explanatorily, latent knowledge, by open ridicule in her presence of some absent other's ignorant lapse. With what success had he attempted direct instruction? She followed not all, a part of the whole, gave attention with interest, comprehended with surprise, with care repeated, with greater difficulty remembered, forgot with ease, with misgiving re-remembered, re-repeated, with error. What system had proved more effective? Indirect suggestion implicating self-interest. Example? She disliked umbrella with rain. He liked woman with umbrella. She disliked new hat with rain. He liked woman with new hat. He bought new hat with rain. She carried umbrella with new hat. Enjoy.
Accepting the analogy implied in his guest's parable, which examples of apostolic eminence did he adduce? 3 seekers of the pure truth: Moses of Egypt, Moses Maimonides, author of Mor Debukim, Guide of the Perplexed, and Moses Mendelssohn, of such eminence that from Moses of Egypt to Moses Mendelssohn there arose none like Moses Maimonides. What statement was made, under correction, by Bloom concerning a 4th seeker of pure truth, by name Aristotle, mentioned with permission by Stephen? That the seeker mentioned had been a pupil of rabbinical philosopher, name uncertain. Were there other anapocryphal illustrious sons of the law and children of a selected or rejected race mentioned? Felix Bartholdi Mendelssohn, composer, Baruch Spinoza, philosopher, Mendoza, pugilist, Ferdinand Lassalle, reformer and dualist. What fragment of verse from the ancient Hebrew and ancient Irish languages were cited with modulations of voice and translations of text by guest to host and by host to guest. By Stephen, Shul 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 Arun, Shul Kasaker August Shul Kukun. Walk, walk, walk your way, walk in safety, walk with care. By Bloom, Kifalok Haramon, Rakatek, Mybed Laid, Sam Ata. Thy temple amid thy hair is as a slice of pomegranate. How was a glyphic comparison of the phonic symbols of both languages made in substantiation of the oral comparison? On the penultimate blank page of a book, entitled of inferior literary style, Sweets of Sin, produced by Bloom and so manipulated that its front cover came in contact with the surface of the table. With a pencil, supplied by Stephen wrote the Irish characters for G, E, D, M, simple and modified, and Bloom in turn wrote the Hebrew characters Gimel, Aleph, Daleth, and in the absence of Mem, a substituted Goff, explaining their arithmetical values as ordinal and cardinal numbers, videlicet 3, 1, 4, and 100. Was the knowledge possessed by both of each of these languages, the extinct and the revived, theoretical or practical? Theoretical, being confined to certain grammatical rules of accidence and syntax, and practically excluding vocabulary. What points of contact existed between these languages and between the people who spoke them? The presence of guttural sounds, diacritic aspirations, epithetic and servile letters in both languages, their antiquity, both having been taught on the plain of Shinar 242 years after the deluge in the seminary instituted by Phineas Farseg, descendant of Noah, progenitor of Israel, and descendant of Heber and Haramon, progenitors of Ireland. Their archaeological, genealogical, hagiographical, exegetical, homiletic, toponymastic, historical, and religious literatures comprising the works of rabbis and Chaldees, Torah, Talmud, Mishnah and Gemara, Maser, Pentateuch, books of the Dun Cow, Book of Ballymote, Garland of Howth, Book of Kells. Their dispersal, persecution, survival, and revival, the isolation of their synagogical and ecclesiastical rites in the ghetto, South Mary Abbey, and Mass House, Adam and Eve's Tavern, the prescription of their national costumes in penal laws and Jewish dress acts, the restoration in Shannon David of Sion, and the possibility of Irish political autonomy or devolution. What anthem did Bloom chant partially in anticipation of that multiple, ethnically irreducible consummation? Kolad Baljal Pinama, Nevex Jehudi Hamajah. Why was the chant arrested at the conclusion of this first distich? In consequence of defective mnemonic technique. How did the chanter compensate for this deficiency? By a paraphrasistic version of the general text. In what common study did their mutual reflections merge? The increasing simplification traceable from the Egyptian epigraphic hieroglyphs to the Greek and Roman alphabets, and the anticipation of modern stenography and telegraphic code and the cuneiform inscriptions, Semitic, and the virgular concatenate Ogham writing, Celtic.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Donner, the author of the book All the Frequent Troubles of Our Days. I am working on another book, another biography, at Oxford, where I'm a visiting scholar, and I am pleased to invite you into my office here. I have been doing the Bloomsday celebrations for over a decade in New York at Symphony Space, so it's so much fun to be doing this in this context remotely. O'Madden Burke. Free fox in a free hen roost. Davy Byrne, yawning. Ugh. Bloom. Mixed races and mixed marriage. Lenehan. What about mixed bathing? Bloom explains to those near him his schemes for social regeneration. All agree with him. The keeper of the Kildare Street Museum appears, dragging a lorry on which are the shaking statues of several naked goddesses. Venus Callipyge, Venus Pandemos, Venus Metempsychosis, and plaster figures, also naked, representing the new 9 muses: commerce, operatic music, amour, publicity, manufacture, liberty of speech, plural voting, gastronomy, private hygiene, seaside concert entertainments, painless obstetrics, and astronomy for the people. Father Farley. He is an Episcopalian, an agnostic, an anything-garian seeking to overthrow our holy faith. Mrs. Reardon tears up her will. I'm disappointed in you, you bad man. Mother Grogan removes her boot to throw it at Bloom. You beast! You abominable person! Nosy Flynn, give us a tune, Bloom. One of the old sweet songs. Bloom, with rollicking humor. I vowed that I never would leave her. She turned out a cruel deceiver. With my tooraloom, 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 tooraloom. Hoppy Holohan. Good old Bloom! There's nobody like him after all. Paddy Leonard, stage Irishman. Bloom. What railway opera is like a tram line in Gibraltar? The Rose of Castile. Laughter. Ah! Lenehan, plagiarist! Down with Bloom! The Veiled Sibyl, enthusiastically. I'm a Bloomite, and I glory in it. I believe in him in spite of all. I'd give my life for him, the funniest man on earth. Theodore Purefoy, in fishing cap and oilskin jacket. He employs a mechanical device to frustrate the sacred ends of nature. The Veiled Sibyl stabs herself. My hero, God! She dies. Many most attractive and enthusiastic women also commit suicide by stabbing, drowning, drinking prussic acid, aconite, arsenic, opening their veins, refusing food, casting themselves under steamrollers from the top of Nelson's Pillar into the great vat of Guinness's brewery, asphyxiating themselves by placing their heads in gas ovens, hanging themselves in stylish garters, leaping from windows of different stories. Alexander J. Dowie, violently. Fellow Christians and anti-Bloomites, the man called Bloom is from the roots of hell, a disgrace to Christian men, a fiendish libertine from his earliest years. This stinking goat of Mendes gave precocious signs of infantile debauchery, recalling the cities of the plain with a dissolute grandam. This vile hypocrite, bronzed with infamy, is the white bull mentioned in the Apocalypse, a worshipper of the Scarlet Woman. Intrigue is the very breath of his nostrils. The stake faggots and cauldron of boiling oil are for him. Caliban! The mob. Lynch him! Roast him! He's as bad as Parnell was! Mr. Fox! Mother Grogan throws her boot at Bloom. Several shopkeepers from Upper and Lower Dorset Street throw objects of little or no commercial value. Ham bones, condensed milk tins, unsaleable cabbage, stale bread, sheep's tails, odd pieces of fat.
Recite the first major part of this chanted legend. Little Harry Hughes and his schoolfellows all went out for to play ball, went out for to play ball. And the very first ball little Harry Hughes played, he drove it o'er the Jew's garden wall. He drove it o'er the Jew's garden wall. And the very second ball little Harry Hughes played, he broke the Jew's windows all. He broke the Jews' windows all. How did the son of Rudolph receive this first part? With unmixed feeling. Smiling, a Jew, he heard with pleasure and saw the unbroken kitchen window. Recite the second part, minor, of the legend. Then out there came the Jew's daughter, and she all dressed in green. Come back, you pretty little boy, and play your ball again, and play your ball again. I can't come back, and I won't come back, without my schoolfellows all. For if my master he did hear, he'd make it a sorry ball. He'd make it a sorry ball. She took him by the lily-white hand and led him along the hall, until she led him to a room where none could hear him call, where none could hear him call. She took a penknife out of her pocket and cut off his little head, and now he'll play his ball no more, for he lies among the dead, for he lies among the dead.
Hello, my name is Mark Edward Hornish. I'm in South Pasadena, California, and I'll be reading from episode 17, part 14 of James Joyce Ulysses. I'll be reading from this edition of the book, which I purchased in Bellingham, Washington last summer as I was on my way to fly to Dublin for the James Joyce Bloomsday Centennial on June 16. I lugged this big heavy thing around with me for the next 2 months while I was there, thinking that I would finish this in the amount of time that I was in Ireland, and in fact I didn't even come close. I brought it home and I spent the next 6 months, but I'm proud to say that unlike many people out there in the world, I actually did manage to read this entire thing cover to cover. So that's a life accomplishment right there. So allow me to begin. How did the father of Millicent receive this second part? With mixed feelings. Unsmiling, he heard and saw with wonder a Jew's daughter, all dressed in green. Condense Stephen's commentary. One of all, the least of all, is the victim predestined. Once by inadvertence, twice by design, he challenges his destiny. It comes when he is abandoned and challenges him reluctant and, as an apparition of hope and youth, holds him unresisting. It leads him to a strange habitation, to a secret infidel apartment, and there, implacable, immolates him, consenting. Why was the host, victim predestined, sad? He wished that a tale of deed should be told, of a deed not by him, should by him not be told. Why was the host reluctant, unresisting, still, in accordance with the law of the conservation of energy? Why was the host, secret infidel, silent? He weighed the possible evidences for and against ritual murder, the incitations of the hierarchy, the superstition of the populace, the propagation of a rumor in continued fraction of veridicity, the envy of opulence, the influence of retaliation, the sporadic reappearance of atavistic delinquency, the mitigating circumstances of fanaticism, hypnotic suggestion, and somnambulism. From which, if any, of these mental or physical disorders was he not totally immune? From hypnotic suggestion, once waking, he had not recognized his sleeping apartment. More than once, waking, he had been for an indefinite time incapable of moving or uttering sounds. From somnambulism, once, sleeping, his body had risen, crouched, and crawled in the direction of a heatless fire, and, having attained its destination, there, curled unheeded in night attire, had lain sleeping. Had this latter, or any cognate phenomenon, declared itself in any member of his family? Twice, in Hollis Street and in Ontario Terrace, his daughter Millicent, Millie, at the ages of 6 and 8 years, had uttered in sleep an exclamation of terror, and had replied to the interrogation of two figures in night attire with a vacant, mute expression. What other infantile memories had he of her? 15 June 1889, a querulous newborn female infant crying to cause and lessen congestion. A child renamed Padney Socks, she shook with shocks her money box, counted his 3 free money penny buttons, 1 Toulouse Toulouse. A doll, a boy, a sailor she cast away, blonde, born of too dark. She had blonde ancestry, remote, a violation. Herr Hauptmann Hainau, Austrian Army, proximate, a hallucination. Lieutenant Mulvey, British Navy. What endemic characteristics were present? Conversely, the nasal and frontal formation was derived in a direct line of lineage, which, though interrupted, would continue at distant intervals to more distant intervals to its most distant intervals. What memories had he of her adolescence? She relegated her hoop and skipping rope to a recess. On the Duke's lawn, entreated by an English visitor, she declined to permit him to make and take away her photographic image, objection not stated. On the South Circular Road, in the company of Elsa Potter, followed by an individual of sinister aspect, she went halfway down Stamer Street and turned abruptly back, reason of change not stated. On the brief vigil of the 15th anniversary of her birth, she wrote a letter from Mullingar, County Westmeath, making a brief allusion to a local student, faculty and year not stated. Did that first division, portending a second division, afflict him? Less than he had imagined, more than he had hoped. What second departure was contemporaneously perceived by him similarly, if differently? A temporary departure of his cat. Why similarly? Why differently? Similarly, because actuated by a secret purpose, the quest of a new male, Mullingar student, or of a healing herb, valerian. Differently, because of possible returns to the inhabitants or to the habitation. In other aspects, were there differences similar? In passivity, in economy, in the instinct of tradition, in unexpectedness. This ends episode 17, section 14. He's having memories of his daughter.
My name is Sarah Leibel, and I'm reading in Providence, Rhode Island. Inasmuch as leaning, she sustained her blonde hair for him to ribbon it for her. Cf. Neck-arching cat. Moreover, on the free surface of the lake in Stephen's Green, amid inverted reflections of trees, her uncommented spit, describing concentric circles of waterings, indicated by the constancy of its permanence, the locus of a somnolent prostrate fish. Cf. Mouse-watching cat. Again, in order to remember the date, combatants, issue, and consequences of a famous military engagement, she pulled a plait of her hair. Cf. Ear-washing cat. Furthermore, silly Millie, She dreamed of having had an unspoken, unremembered conversation with a horse whose name had been Joseph, to whom, she had offered a tumbler full of lemonade, which he, had prepared to have accepted, cf. hearth-dreaming cat. Hence, in passivity, in economy, in the instinct of tradition, in unexpectedness, their differences were similar. In what way had he utilized gifts? 1, an owl, 2, a clock, given as matrimonial auguries to interest and to instruct her. As object lessons to explain, 1, the nature and habits of oviparous animals, the possibility of aerial flight, certain abnormalities of vision, the secular process of embalsamation. 2, the principle of the pendulum, exemplified in bob, wheel gear, and regulator, the translation in terms of human or social regulation of the various positions clockwise of movable indicators on an unmoving dial, the exactitude of the recurrence per hour of an instant in each hour when the longer and the shorter indicator were at the same angle of inclination, videlicet, 5.53 minutes past each hour per hour in arithmetical progression. In what manners did she reciprocate? She remembered. On the 27th anniversary of his birth, she presented to him a breakfast moustache-up of imitation Crown Derby porcelain ware. She provided, at quarter day or thereabouts, if or when purchases had been made by him, not for her, she showed herself attentive to his necessities, anticipating his desires. She admired. A natural phenomena having been explained by him, not for her, she expressed the immediate desire to possess, without gradual acquisition, a fraction of his science, the moiety, the quarter, 1,000th part. What proposal did Bloom, diambulist, father of Millie, somnambulist, make to Stephen, noctambulist? To pass in repose the hours intervening between Thursday proper and Friday normal, on an extemporized cubicle in the apartment immediately above the kitchen and immediately adjacent to the sleeping apartment of his host and hostess. What various advantages would or might have resulted from a prolongation of such extemporization? For the guest, security of domicile and seclusion of study. For the host, rejuvenation of intelligence, vicarious satisfaction. For the hostess, disintegration of obsession, acquisition of correct Italian pronunciation. Why might these several provisional contingencies between a guest and a hostess not necessarily preclude or be precluded by a permanent eventuality of reconciliatory union between a schoolfellow and a Jew's daughter? Because the way to a daughter led through mother, the way to mother led through daughter. To what inconsequent polysyllabic question of his host did the guest return a monosyllabic negative answer? If he had known the late Mrs. Emily Sinico, accidentally killed at Sydney Parade Railway Station, 14 October 1903. What inchoate corollary statement was consequently suppressed by the host? A statement explanatory of his absence on the occasion of the interment of Mrs. Mary Goulding, 26 June 1903, vigil of the anniversary of the decease of Rudolph Bloom, born Virag. Was the proposal of asylum accepted? Promptly, inexplicably, with amicability, gratefully it was declined. What exchange of money took place between host and guest? The former returned to the latter, without interest, a sum of money, £1 7s, advanced by the latter to the former.
I'm Patty Marks, the last time I checked, and we're in Sutton Place Park in Manhattan, and I am in front of a pig that's famous, and some of what I'm going to tell you about the pig might be true. It was done by a sculptor who has a more famous piece of Peter Pan in Central Park, and it is a copy of a pig that is in Paris, that is a copy of a pig that is in Italy, more or less. And that's really all I know about the pig, and even that I don't know. And I'm going to be reading, I think you can guess, from Ulysses. And my relationship with James Joyce can be summarized, really, the 2 pages I'm going to be about to read. That's not true. That would be Ulysses. I've never read Ulysses before, except for these 2 pages. With James Joyce, I have a much closer relationship because when I was in 10th grade, at my most sarcastic phase in my entire life, I read this book. And I read it for an English class, and it's very annotated, and as I said, I was obnoxiously sarcastic. So there are things like I pointed to Harold Donner and wrote, "Oh, James knows French. I'm impressed." And then there's a lot of life is hopeless. But I was taught in high school, as many people were, that the point of literature was to find the references to sex. It was like, where's Waldo's penis? So a lot of things are circled, and then I've helpfully annotated them, really mean sex. So that for me is James Joyce. Now, what else do I have to tell you? Before I start, I don't know how to play ukulele, but I pretend I do. And I've written a little thing about my reading. And it's in 2 verses. It's called On Reading James Joyce. And I'm going to try to balance this with the ukulele. The main reason I play the ukulele is because it's blue. And I like the color. All right, this is not going to be good, but I warned you. On Reading James Joyce. Verse 1, The Optimist. Read. James Joyce don't understand a bit. After just a page or 2, and then it starts to click. I should probably do that again. But now I'm going to read The Realist. Take it into account, it's a little hard for me because I'm trying to... So this doesn't go away. This is called The Realist. Read. James Joyce don't understand a bit, but my part's a page or 2. Then I get to quit. The end. All right, now the attempted reading. I'm reading from episode 17. I'm going to read it as if I understand it. I don't understand it. The first part, it's done in the catechism, which makes it a little easier. This is not my part. This is my friend's part. She's not doing it. I'm going to throw this down. So, the first bit, I will say, reminds me of an appliance manual on how to set up speakers, a speaker system. All right, here goes. What counter-proposals were alternately advanced, accepted, modified, declined, restated in other terms, reaccepted, ratified, reconfirmed? Oh, funny you should ask. To inaugurate a prearranged course of Italian instruction, place the residence of the instructed. To inaugurate a course of vocal instruction, place the residence of the instructors. To inaugurate a series of static, semi-static, and peripatetic intellectual dialogues, places the residence of both speakers, if both speakers were resident in the same place, the Ship Hotel and Tavern, 6 Lower Abbey Street, West and East Connery proprietors, the National Library of Ireland, 10 Kildare Street, the National Maternity Hospital, 2930 and 31 Hollis Street, a public garden, the vicinity of a place of worship, a conjunction of two or more public thoroughfares, the point of bisection of a right line drawn between their residents, if both speakers were resident in different places. Okay. What rendered problematic for Bloom the realization of these mutually self-excluding propositions? Okay. The irreparability of the past. Once, at a performance of Albert Hengler's circus in the Rotunda, Rutland Square, Dublin, an intuitive, partly colored clown in quest of paternity. You know, here's the thing. I live in Bedpan Alley. There's a lot of ambulances, so I will just take this up from the sad sentence. The irreparability of the past. Once, at a performance of Albert Hengler's circus in the Rotunda, Rutland Square, Dublin, an intuitive, partly colored clown in quest of paternity had penetrated from the ring to a place in the auditorium where Bloom, solitary, was seated and had publicly declared to an exhilarated audience that he, Bloom, was his, the clown's, papa. The imprevedibility of the future. Once, in the summer of 1898, he, Bloom, had marked a florin, 2 shillings, with 3 notches on the milled edge and tendered it in the payment of an account due to and received by J&T Davy, Family Grocers, 1 Charlemont Mall, Grand Canal, for circulation on the waters of civic finances, for possible circuitous or direct return. Was the clown Bloom's son? No. Had Bloom's coin returned? Never. Why would a recurrent frustration the more depress him? That's what I was thinking. Because at the critical turning point of human existence, he desired to amend many social conditions, the product of inequality and avarice and international animosity. 1 more page to go. He believed then that human life was infinitely perfectible, eliminating these conditions. There remain the generic conditions imposed by natural, as distinct from human law, as integral parts of the human whole, the necessity of destruction to procure alimentary sustenance, the painful character of the ultimate functions of separate existence, the agonies of birth and death, the monotonous menstruation of simian and particularly human females extending from the age of puberty to the menopause, inevitable accidents at sea, in mines and factories, certain very painful maladies and their resultant surgical operations, innate lunacy and congenital criminality, decimating epidemics, catastrophic cataclysms, which, leave. They're very interested, the helicopters in Joyce. Catastrophic cataclysms, which make terror the basis of human mentality, seismic upheavals, the epicenters of which are located in densely populated regions, the fact of vital growth, though convulsions of metamorphosis from infancy through maturity to decay. Why did he desist from speculation? Because it was a task for a superior intelligence to substitute other more acceptable phenomena in place of the less acceptable phenomenon to be removed. Did Stephen participate in his dejection? He affirmed his significance as a conscious, rational animal, proceeding syllogistically from the unknown to the unknown. That didn't make any sense. From the known to the unknown, and a conscious, rational reagent between a micro and a macrocosm, ineluctably constructed upon the incertitude of the void. Was this affirmation apprehended by Bloom? Verbally, substantially. What comforted his misapprehension? That, as a competent, keyless citizen, he had proceeded energetically from the unknown to the known through the incertitude of the void. In what order of precedence, with what attendant ceremony, was the exodus from the house of bondage to the wilderness of inhabitation effected? Lighted candle and stick worn by Bloom, diaconal hat on ash plants worn by Stephen. I hope you understood that more than I did.
With what intonation, Secreto, of what commemorative song? The 113th. Modus peregrinus. In exitu Israel de Egypto, domus Jacob de populo barbaro. What did each sow at the door of egress? Bloom set the candlestick on the floor. Stephen put the hat on his head. For what creature was the door of egress a door of ingress? For a cat. What spectacle confronted them when they, first the host, then the guest, emerged silently, doubly dark from obscurity by a passage from the rear of the house into the penumbra of the garden? The heaven tree of stars, hung with humid night blue fruit. With what meditations did Bloom accompany his demonstration to his companion of various constellation? Meditations of evolution increasingly vaster. Of the moon, invisible in incipient lunation, approaching perigee. Of the infinite, litigious, scintillating, uncondensed Milky Way, discernible by daylight by an observer placed at the lower end of a cylindrical vertical shaft 5,000 feet deep, sunk from the surface towards the center of the earth. Of Sirius, Alpha in Canis Major, 10 light years, 57 trillion miles distant, and in volume 900 times the dimension of our planet. Of Arcturus, of the precession of equinoxes, of Orion with belt and sextuple sun, Theta and nebula, in which 100 of our solar systems could be contained. Of moribund and of nascent new stars, such as Nova in 1901. Of our system plunging towards the constellation of Hercules. Of the parallax or parallactic drift of so-called fixed stars. In reality, ever moving from immeasurably remote eons to infinitely remote futures, in comparison with which the years 70 of allotted human life formed a parenthesis of infinitesimal brevity. Were there obverse meditations of involution increasingly less fast? Of the eons of geological periods recorded in the stratifications of the earth? Of the myriad, minute entomological organic existences concealed in cavities of the earth, beneath removable stones, in hives and mounds, of microbes, germs, bacteria, bacilli, spermatozoa, of the incalculable trillions of billions of millions of imperceptible molecules contained by cohesion of molecular affinity in a single pinhead, of the universe of human serum constellated with red and white bodies, themselves universes of void space constellated with other bodies, each in continuity its universe of divisible component bodies, of which each was again divisible in divisions of redivisible component bodies, dividends and divisors ever diminishing without actual division till, if the progress were carried far enough, not nowhere was never reached. Why did he not elaborate these calculations to a more precise result? Because some years previously, in 1886, when occupied with the problem of the quadrature of the circle, he had learned of the existence of a number computed to a relative degree of accuracy to be of such magnitude, and of so many places, e.g. the ninth power of the ninth power of 9, that the result having been obtained, 33 closely printed volumes of 1,000 pages each of innumerable quires and reams of India paper would have to be requisitioned in order to contain the complete tale of its printed integers of units. Tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions. The nucleus of the nebula of every digit of every series containing succinctly the potentiality of being raised to the utmost kinetic elaboration of any power of any of its powers. Did he find the problem of the inhabitability of the planets and their satellites by a race given in species, and of the possible social and moral redemption of said race by a redeemer easier of solution? Of a different order of difficulty. Conscious that the human organism, normally capable of sustaining an atmospheric pressure of 19 tons, when elevated to a considerable altitude in the terrestrial atmosphere, suffered with arithmetical progression of intensity, according as the line of demarcation between troposphere and stratosphere was approximated, from nasal hemorrhage, impeded respiration, and vertigo. When proposing this problem for solution, he had conjectured as a working hypothesis, which could not be proved impossible, that a more adaptable and differently anatomically constructed race of beings might subsist otherwise under Martian, Mercurial, Veneral, Jovian, Saturnian, Neptunian, or Uranian sufficient and equivalent conditions, though an apogean humanity of beings created in varying forms with finite differences resulting similar to the whole and to one another, would probably there as here remain inalterably and inalienably attached to vanities of vanities, and to all that is vanity. And the problem of possible redemption? The minor was proved by the major.
Hi, my name is Emma Froelich-Shea. I am reading to you from New York City, and this is passage 18. Which various features of the constellations were in turn considered? The various colors significant of various degrees of vitality, white, yellow, crimson, vermilion, cinnabar, their degrees of brilliancy, their magnitude revealed up to and including the seventh, their positions, the Wagoner Star, Walsingham Way, the Chariot of David, the annual cinctures of Saturn, the condensation of spiral nebulae into suns, the interdependent gyrations of double suns, the independent synchronous discoveries of Galileo, Simon Marius, Piazzi, Leverrier, Herschel, Gall. The systematizations attempted by Bode and Kepler of cubes of distances and squares of times of revolution. The almost infinite compressibility of hirsute comets and their vast elliptical, egressive, and re-entrant orbits from perihelion to aphelion. The sidereal origin of meteoric stones. The Libyan floods on Mars, about the period of the birth of the younger astroscopist. the annual recurrence of meteoric showers about the period of the feast of S. Lawrence, martyr, 10 August, the monthly recurrence known as the new moon, with the old moon in her arms, the positive influence of celestial on human bodies, the appearance of a star, first magnitude of exceeding brilliancy, dominating by night and day a new luminous sun generated by the collision and amalgamation in incandescence of two non-luminous X-suns about the period of the birth of William Shakespeare, over Delta in the recumbent, never-setting constellation of Cassiopeia, and of a star second magnitude of similar origin, lesser brilliancy, which had appeared in and disappeared from the constellation of the Corona Septentrionalis about the period of the birth of Leopold Bloom, and of other stars of presumably similar origin, which had effectively or presumably appeared in and disappeared from the constellation of Andromeda about the period of the birth of Stephen Dedalus, and in and from the constellation of Auriga some years after the birth and death of Rudolph Bloom Jr., and in and from other constellations some years before or after the birth or death of other persons. The attendant phenomena of eclipses, solar and lunar, from immersion to emersion, abatement of wind, transit of shadow, taciturnity of winged creatures, emergence of nocturnal or crepuscular animals, persistence of ephemeral light, obscurity of terrestrial waters, pallor of human beings. His, Bloom's, logical conclusion, having weighed the matter and allowing for possible error, that it was not a heaven tree, not a heaven grub, not a heaven beast, not a heaven man, that it was utopia, there being no known method from the known to the unknown, an infinity renderable equally finite by the supposition's probable apposition of one or more bodies equally of the same and of different magnitudes, of mobility of illusory forms immobilized in space, remobilized in air. A past which possibly had ceased to exist as a present before its spectators had entered actual present existence. Was he convinced of the aesthetic value of the spectacle? Indubitably, in consequence of the reiterated examples of poets in the delirium of the frenzy of attachment or in the abatement of rejection, invoking ardent sympathetic constellations or the frigidity of the satellite of their planet. Did he then accept as an article of belief the theory of astrological influences upon subluminary disasters? It seemed to him as possible of proof as of confutation, and the nomenclature employed in its selenographical charts as attributable to verifiable intuition as to fallacious analogy. The lake of dreams, the sea of rains, the gulf of dews, the ocean of fecundity. What special affinities appeared to him to exist between the moon and woman? Her antiquity in preceding and surviving successive Tellurian generations, her nocturnal predominance, her satellitic dependence, her luminary reflection, her constancy under all her phases, rising and setting by her appointed times, waxing and waning, the forced invariability of her aspect, her indeterminate response to inaffirmative interrogation, her potency over effluent and refluent waters, her power to enamor, to mortify, to invest with beauty, to render insane, to incite to and aid delinquency, the tranquil inscrutability of her visage, the terribility of her isolated, dominant, implacable, resplendent propinquity, her omens of tempest and of calm, the stimulation of her light, her motion, and her presence, the admonition of her craters, her arid seas, her silence, her splendor when visible, her attraction when invisible.
Hi, I'm Elspeth Green. I'm based in New York. And in terms of my relationship to the text, it's been a book that I've really loved since I read it probably almost 15 years ago. Was able to actually co-teach a course on it at Princeton with Josh Kotin a few years ago. That was a really great experience. And yeah, happy to be reading from Ithaca, which has always been my favorite episode. So here we go. What visible luminous sign attracted Bloom's, who attracted Stephen's gaze? In the second story, rear of his, Bloom's, house, the light of a paraffin oil lamp with oblique shade projected on a screen of roller blinds supplied by Frank O'Hara, window blind, curtain pole, and revolving shutter manufacturer, 16 Anger Street. How did he elucidate the mystery of an invisible person, his wife, Marion, Molly Bloom, denoted by a visible splendid sign, a lamp? With indirect and direct verbal allusions or affirmations, with subdued affection and admiration, with description, with impediment, with suggestion. Both then were silent? Silent, each contemplating the other in both mirrors of the reciprocal flesh of their, his, not his fellow faces. Were they indefinitely inactive? At Stephen's suggestion, at Bloom's instigation both, first Stephen, then Bloom, in penumbra urinated, their sides contiguous, their organs of micturation reciprocally rendered invisible by manual circumposition, their gazes, first Bloom's, then Stephen's, elevated to the projected luminous and semi-luminous shadow. Similarly, the trajectories of their first sequent, then simultaneous urinations were dissimilar. Bloom's longer, less irruent, in the incomplete form of the bifurcated penultimate alphabetical letter, who, in his ultimate year at high school, 1880, had been capable of attaining the point of greatest altitude against the whole concurrent strength of the institution, 210 scholars. Stephen's higher, more sibilant, who, in the ultimate hours of the previous day, had augmented by diuretic consumption and insistent vesical pressure. What different problems presented themselves to each concerning the invisible audible collateral organ of the other? To Bloom, the problems of irritability, tumescence, rigidity, reactivity, dimension, sanitariness, pilosity. To Stephen, the problem of the sacerdotal integrity of Jesus circumcised, 1 January, holiday of obligation to hear Mass and abstain from unnecessary servile work, and the problem as to whether the divine prepuce, the carnal bridal ring of the Holy Roman Catholic Apostolic Church, conserved in Calcutta, were deserving of semper hyperduli, or of the 4th degree of latria, according to the abscission of such divine excrescences as hair and toenails. What celestial sign was by both simultaneously observed? A star, precipitated with great apparent velocity across the firmament from Vega in the Lyre, above the zenith, beyond the star group of the Tress of Berenice, toward the zodiacal sign of Leo. How did the centripetal remainer afford egress to the centrifugal departer? By inserting the barrel of an aruginated male key in the hole of an unstable female lock, obtaining a purchase on the bow of the key and turning its wards from right to left, withdrawing a bolt from its staple, pulling inward spasmodically an obsolescent unhinged door and revealing an aperture for free egress and free ingress. How did they take leave, one of the other, in separation? Standing perpendicular at the same door and on different sides of its base, the lines of their valedictory arms meeting at any point and forming any angle less than the sum of two right angles. What sound accompanied the union of their tangent, the disunion of their, respectively, centrifugal and centripetal hands? The sound of the peal of the hour of the night by the chime of the bells in the church of St. George. What echoes of that sound were by both and each heard? By Stephen, Liliata rutilantium, terma circumdet, jubilantium te virginum, chorus excipiat. By Bloom, hi-o, 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 hi-o.
This is Adair Kaufman in Greenwich, Connecticut, reading Ulysses. Where were the several members of the company which with Bloom that day, at the bidding of that peal, had travelled from Sandy Mount in the south to Glensnevin in the north? Martin Cunningham, in bed. Jack Power, in bed. Simon Daedalus, in bed. Tom Kiernan, in bed. Ned Lambert, in bed. Joe Hines, in bed. John Henry Menton, in bed. Bernard Corrigan, in bed. Patsy Dignam, in bed. Patty Dignam, in the grave. Alone, what did Bloom hear? The double reverberation of retreating feet on the heaven-born earth, the double vibration of a Jew's harp in the resonant lane. Alone, what did Bloom feel? The cold of interstellar space, thousands of degrees below freezing point, or the absolute zero of Fahrenheit, centigrade, or Réaumur, the incipient intimations of proximate dawn. Of what did bell chime and hand touch and footstep and lone chill remind him? Of companions now in various manners, in different places, defunct. Percy Apjohn, killed in action, Modder River. Philip Gilligan, Tysus, Jervis Street Hospital. Matthew F. Kane, accidental drowning, Dublin Bay. Philip Moisel, Paemia, Haighesbury Street. Michael Hart, Tysus, Mater Misericordia Hospital. Patrick Dignam, apoplexy, Sandy Mount. What prospect of what phenomena inclined him to remain? The disparition of three final stars, the diffusion of daybreak, the apparition of a new solar disk. Had he ever been a spectator of those phenomena? Once, in 1887, after a protracted performance of charades in the house of Luke Doyle, Kimmage, he had awaited with patience the apparition of the diurnal phenomenon, seated on a wall, his gaze turned in the direction of Mizroch, the east. He remembered the initial paraphenomena: more active air, a matutinal distant cock, ecclesiastical clocks at various points, avine music, the isolated tread of an early wayfarer, the visible diffusion of the light of an invisible luminous body, the first golden limb of the resurgent sun, perceptible, low on the horizon. Did he remain? With deep inspiration he returned, retraversing the garden, re-entering the passage, reclosing the door. With brief suspiration he reassumed the candle, reascended the stairs, reapproached the door of the front room, hall floor, and re-entered. What suddenly arrested his ingress? The right temporal lobe of the hollow sphere of his cranium came into contact with a solid timber angle where, an infinitesimal but sensible fraction of a second later, a painful sensation was located in consequence of antecedent sensations, transmitted and registered. Describe the alterations effected in the disposition of the articles of furniture. A sofa, upholstered in prune plush, had been translocated from opposite the door to the ingleside near the compactly furled Union Jack, an alteration which he had frequently intended to execute. The blue and white checker inlaid majolica-topped table had been placed opposite the door, and the place vacated by the prune plush sofa. The walnut sideboard, a projecting angle of which had momentarily arrested his ingress, had been moved from its position beside the door to a more advantageous, but more perilous position in front of the door. Two chairs had been moved from right and left of the ingleside to the position originally occupied by the blue and white checker inlaid majolica-topped table. Describe them. 1. A squat stuffed easy chair with stout arms extended and back slanted to the rear, which, repelled in recoil, had then upturned in a regular fringe of a rectangular rug and now displayed on its amply upholstered seat a centralized, diffusing, and diminishing discoloration. The other, a slender splayfoot chair of glossy cane curves, placed directly opposite the former, its frame from top to seat and from seat to base being varnished dark brown, its seat being a bright circle of white-plated rush. What significances attach to these two chairs? Significances of similitude, of posture, of symbolism, of circumstantial evidence, of testimonial supreeminence.
What occupied the position originally occupied by the sideboard? A vertical piano, Cadby, with exposed keyboard, its closed coffin supporting a pair of long, yellow ladies' gloves, and an emerald ashtray containing 4 consumed matches, a partly consumed cigarette, and 2 discolored ends of cigarettes. Its music rests supporting the music in the key of G natural for voice and piano of Love's Old Sweet Song, words by G. Clifton Bingham, composed by J. L. Malloy, sung by Madame Antoinette Sterling, open at the last page with the final indications ad libitum, forte, pedal, animato, sustained, pedal, ritirando, close. With what sensations did Bloom contemplate in rotation these objects? With strain, elevating a candlestick. With pain, feeling on his right temple a contused tumescence. With attention, focusing his gaze on a large, dull, passive and slender, bright active. With solicitation, bending and downturning the upturned rug fringe. With amusement, remembering Dr. Malachi Mulligan's scheme of color containing the gradation of green. With pleasure, repeating the words and antecedent act, and perceiving through various channels of internal sensibility the consequent and concomitant, tepid, pleasant diffusion of gradual discoloration. His next proceeding? From an open box on the majolica top table, he extracted a black diminutive cone, 1 inch in height, placed it on its circular base on a small tin plate, placed his candlestick on the right corner of the mantelpiece, produced from his waistcoat a folded page of prospectus, illustrated, entitled Agendath Nataim, unfolded the same, examined it superficially, rolled it into a thin cylinder, ignited it in the candle flame, applied it when ignited to the apex of the cone till the latter reached the stage of rutulence, placed the cylinder in the basin of the candlestick, disposing the unconsumed part in such a manner as to facilitate total combustion. What followed this operation? That truncated conical crater summit of the diminutive volcano emitted a vertical and serpentine fume redolent of aromatic oriental incense. What homothetic objects, other than the candlestick, stood on the mantelpiece? A timepiece of striated Connemara marble, stopped at the hour of 4:46 a.m. on the 21st March, 1896, matrimonial gift of Matthew Dillon. A dwarf tree of glacial arborescence under a transparent bell shade, matrimonial gift of Luke and Caroline Doyle. An embalmed owl, matrimonial gift of Alderman John Hooper. What interchanges of looks took place between these 3 objects and Bloom? In the mirror of the gilt-bordered pier glass, the undecorated back of the dwarf tree regarded the upright back of the embalmed owl. Before the mirror, the matrimonial gift of Alderman John Hooper, with a clear, melancholy, wise, bright, motionless, compassionate gaze, regarded Bloom, while Bloom, with obscure, tranquil, profound, motionless, compassionated gaze, regarded the matrimonial gift of Luke and Caroline Doyle. What composite asymmetrical image in the mirror then attracted his attention? The image of a solitary, ipso-relative, mutable, alio-relative man. Why solitary, ipso-relative? Brothers and sisters had he none, yet that man's father was his grandfather's son. Why mutable, alio-relative? From infancy to maturity, he had resembled his maternal procreatrix. From maturity to senility, he would increasingly resemble his paternal procreator. What final visual impression was communicated to him by the mirror? The optical reflection of several inverted volumes improperly arranged and not in the order of their common letters, with scintillating titles on the 2 bookshelves opposite.
Hello, my name is Frances Martindale. I'm a children's librarian at the Gordon School in East Providence, Rhode Island. This is not my university copy of Ulysses by James Joyce, but it does represent one of the first books that I was aware of that had been banned. Catalogue these books. Catalogue these books. Tom's Dublin Post Office Directory, 1886. Dennis Florence McCarthy's Poetical Works, copper beech leaf bookmark at page 5. Shakespeare's works, dark crimson Morocco, gold tooled. The Useful Ready Reckoner, brown cloth. The Secret History of the Court of Charles II, red cloth, tooled binding. The Child's Guide, blue cloth. When We Were Boys by William O'Brien, MP, green cloth, slightly faded, envelope bookmark at page 217. Thoughts from Spinoza, maroon leather. The Story of the Heavens by Sir Robert Ball, blue cloth. Ellis's 3 Trips to Madagascar, brown cloth, title obliterated. The Stark Munro Letters by A. Conan Doyle, property of the City of Dublin Public Library, 106 Capel Street, Lent, 21st of May, Whitsun Eve, 1904, due 4th of June, 1904. 13 days overdue. Black cloth binding bearing white letter number ticket. Voyages in China by Vieta, recovered with brown paper, red ink title. Philosophy of the Talmud, sewn pamphlet. Lockhart's Life of Napoleon, cover wanting marginal annotations, minimizing victories, aggrandizing defeats of the protagonist. Soll und Haben by Gustav Freitag, black boards, Gothic characters, cigarette coupon bookmark at page 24. Hosier's History of the Russo-Turkish War, brown cloth, 2 volumes with gummed label, Garrison Library, Governor's Parade, name on recto of flyleaf erased. A Handbook of Astronomy, cover brown leather, detached 5 plates, antique letterpress, long primer, author's footnotes, nonpareil, marginal clues, brevier, caption small pica. The Hidden Life of Christ, black boards. In the Track of the Sun, yellow cloth, title page missing recurrent title intestation. Physical Strength and How to Obtain It by Eugen Sandow, red cloth. Short but yet plain elements of geometry, written in French by F. Ignat Padis, and rendered into English by John Harris, D.D., London. Printed for R. Knaplock at the Bishop's Head, M.D., C.C., X1, with dedicatory epistle to his worthy friend Charles Cox, Esquire, Member of the Parliament for the Borough of Southwark, and having ink calligraph statement on the flyleaf certifying that the book was the property of Michael Gallagher, dated this 10th day of May, 1822, and requesting the person who should find it, if the book should be lost or go astray, to restore it to Michael Gallagher, carpenter, Dewsbury Lane, Enniscorthy, County Wicklow, the finest place in the world. What reflections occupied his mind during the process of reversion of the inverted volumes? The necessity of order, a place for everything and everything in its place, the deficient appreciation of literature possessed by females, the incongruity of an apple incuneated in a tumbler and of an umbrella inclined in a clothes-stool, the insecurity of hiding any secret document behind, beneath, or between the pages of a book. Which volume was the largest in bulk? Hosier's History of the Russo-Turkish War. What, among other data, did the second volume of the work in question contain? The name of a decisive battle, forgotten, frequently remembered by a decisive officer, Major Brien Cooper Tweedy, remembered.
I'm Jonathan Walker, and today I'm reading from New York City, which is why you may hear, of course, horns coming from the window. I'll be reading today from the 1961 well-known and well-used edition of Ulysses, which I acquired when I took a semester-long course in my third year of high school from the eminent Irish scholar and Joycean scholar Howard O'Brien, who then inspired me to go forward and study Samuel Beckett, and in particular Flann O'Brien and the Gaelic language. God help me. So, why, firstly and secondly, did he not consult the work in question? Firstly, in order to exercise mnemotechnic. Secondly, because after an interval of amnesia, when seated at the central table about to consult the work in question, he remembered by mnemotechnic the name of the military engagement, Plevna. What caused him consolation in his sitting posture? The candor, nudity, pose, tranquility, youth, grace, sex, counsel of a statue erect in the center of the table, an image of Narcissus, purchased by auction from P.A. Wren 9 Bachelor's Walk. What caused him irritation in his sitting posture? Inhibitory pressure of collar, size 17, and waistcoat, 5 buttons. 2 articles of clothing superfluous in the costume of mature males and inelastic to alterations of mass by expansion. How was the irritation allayed? He removed his collar, with contained black necktie and collapsible stud, from his neck to a position on the left of the table. He unbuttoned successively, in reversed direction, waistcoat, trousers, shirt, and vest along the medial line of irregular incrispated black hairs, extending in triangular convergence from the pelvic basin over the circumference of the abdomen and umbilicular fossicle along the medial line of nodes to the intersection of the 6th pectoral vertebra, thence produced both ways at right angles and terminating in circles described about 2 equidistant points right and left on the summits of the mammary prominences. He unbraced successively each of 6 minus 1 braced trouser buttons arranged in pairs, of which 1 incomplete. What involuntary actions followed? He compressed between 2 fingers the flesh, circumjacent to a cicatrice in the left infracostal region below the diaphragm, resulting from a sting inflicted 2 weeks and 3 days previously, 23 May 1904, by a bee. He scratched imprecisely with his right hand, though insensible of fruition, various points and surfaces of his partly exposed, wholly abluted skin. He inserted his left hand into the left lower pocket of his waistcoat and extracted and replaced a silver coin, 1 shilling, placed there presumably on the occasion, 10 October 1903, of the interment of Mrs. Emily Sinico, Sydney Parade.
I'm Chloe Dirksen, and I am in Toronto. Compile the budget for 16 June 1904. Debit: 1 pork kidney, 3 pence. 1 copy Freeman's Journal, 1 pence. 1 bath and gratification, 1 shilling 6 pence. Tram fare, 1 pence. 1 in memoriam Patrick Dingham, 5 shillings. 2 Banbury cakes, 1 pence. 1 lunch, 7 pence. 1 renewal fee for book, 1 shilling. 1 packet notepaper and envelopes, 2 pence. 1 dinner and gratification, 2 shillings. 1 postal order and stamp, 2 shillings 8 pence. Tram fare, 1 pence. 1 pig's foot, 4 pence. 1 sheep's trotter, 3 pence. 1 cake fries plain chocolate, 1 pence. 1 square soda bread, 4 pence. 1 coffee and bun, 4 pence. Loan, Stephen Dedalus, refunded. £1, 7 shillings. Credit, cash in hand, 4 shillings 9 pence. Commission received, Freeman's Journal, £1, 7 shillings 6 pence. Loan, Stephen Dedalus, £1, 7 shillings. Balance, 17 shillings 5 pence. £2, 19 shillings 3 pence. Did the process of divestiture continue? Sensible of a benignant, persistent ache in his foot soles, he extended his foot to one side and observed the creases, protuberances, and salient points caused by foot pressure in the course of walking repeatedly in several different directions. Then, inclined, he disnoded the lace knots, unhooked and loosened the laces, took off each of his 2 boots for the second time, detached the partially moistened right sock through the forepart of which the nail of his great toe had again effracted, raised his right foot, and, having unhooked a purple elastic sock suspender, took off his right sock, placed his unclothed right foot on the margin of the seat of his chair, picked at and gently lacerated the protruding part of the great toenail, raised the part lacerated to his nostrils, and inhaled the odor of the quick. Then, with satisfaction, threw away the lacerated unguical fragment. Why with satisfaction? Because the odor inhaled corresponded to other odors inhaled of other unguical fragments, picked and lacerated by Master Bloom, pupil of Mrs. Ellis's juvenile school, patiently each night in the act of brief genuflection and nocturnal prayer and ambitious meditation. In what ultimate ambition had all concurrent and consecutive ambitions now coalesced? Not to inherit by right of primogeniture, Gavelkind or Borough English, or possess in perpetuity an extensive demesne of a sufficient number of acres, roods, and perches, statute land measure, valuation £42, of grazing turbary surrounding a baronial hill with gate lodge and carriage drive, nor, on the other hand, a terrace house or semi-detached villa, described as rus in urbe or qui sigi sana, but to purchase by private treaty in fee simple a thatched bungalow-shaped 2-story dwelling house of southerly aspect, surmounted by vane and lightning conductor, connected with the earth, with porch covered by parasitic plants, ivy or Virginia creeper, hall door, olive green, with smart carriage finish and neat door brasses, stucco front with gilt tracery at eaves and gable, rising, if possible, upon a gentle eminence with agreeable prospect from balcony, with stone pillar parapet over unoccupied and unoccupiable interjacent pastures, and standing in 5 or 6 acres of its own ground, at such a distance from the nearest public thoroughfare as to render its house lights visible at night, above and through a quick-set hornbeam hedge of topiary cutting, situate at a given point not less than 1 statute mile from the periphery of the metropolis, within a time limit of not more than 5 minutes from tram or train line, e.g. Dundrum south or Sutton north, both localities equally reported by trial to resemble the terrestrial poles in being favorable climates for physical subjects. The premises to be held under fee farm grant, released 999 years, the messuage to consist of 1 drawing room with bay window, 2 lancets, thermometer affixed, 1 sitting room, 4 bedrooms, 2 servants' rooms, tiled kitchen with close range and scullery, lounge hall fitted with linen wall presses, fumed oak sectional bookcase containing the Encyclopedia Britannica and New Century Dictionary, transverse obsolete medieval and oriental weapons, dinner gong, alabaster lamp, bowl pendant, vulcanite automatic telephone receiver with adjacent directory, hand-tufted Axminster carpet with cream ground and trellis border, loo table with pillar and claw legs, hearth with massive fire brasses and ormolu mantle chronometer clock, guaranteed timekeeper with cathedral chime, barometer with hygrographic chart, comfortable lounge settees and corner fitments, upholstered in ruby plush with good springing and sunk center, 3-banner Japanese screen and cuspidors, club style, rich wine-colored leather, gloss renewable with a minimum of labor by use of linseed oil and vinegar, and pyramidically prismatic central chandelier luster, bentwood perch with a finger-tame parrot, expurgated language, embossed mural paper at 10 per dozen, with transverse swags of carmine floral design and top crown frieze, staircase, 3 continuous flights at successive right angles of varnished clear-grained oak, treads and risers, newel balusters and handrail with stepped-up panel dado, dressed with camphorated wax, bathroom, hot and cold supply, reclining and shower, water closet on mezzanine provided with opaque single-pane oblong window, tip-up seat, bracket lamp, brass tie rod brace, armrests, footstool, and artistic oleograph on inner face of door, ditto plain. Servants' apartments with separate sanitary and hygienic necessaries for cook, general, and between maid, salary rising by biennial, unearned increments of £2 with comprehensive fidelity insurance annual bonus, £1, and retiring allowance based on the 65 system after 30 years service. Pantry, buttery, larder, refrigerator, out offices, coal and wood cellarage with wine bin, still and sparkling vintages, for distinguished guests. If entertained to dinner, evening dress, carbon monoxide gas supply throughout.
Hello, my name is Francis Gasparini. I'm an author living in Sierra Madre, California. I have a strange connection to Joyce, which is that my relatives used to live in the building he occupied in Trieste. And I have a connection to this passage, which is that I'm also an overly ambitious and daydreaming kind of gardener. What additional attractions might the grounds contain? As addenda, a tennis and 5 court, a shrubbery, a glass summer house with tropical palms, equipped in the best botanical manner, a rockery with water splay, a beehive arranged on humane principles, oval flower beds in rectangular grass plots set with eccentric ellipses of scarlet and chrome tulips, blue scillas, crocuses, polyanthus, sweet william, sweet pea, lily of the valley, bulbs obtainable from Sir James W. Mackey Limited, wholesale and retail seed and bulb merchant and nurseryman, agent for chemical manures, 23 Sackville Street, Upper, an orchard, kitchen garden and vinery, protected against illegal trespassers by glass-topped mural enclosures, a lumber shed with padlock for various inventoried implements. As eel traps, lobster pots, fishing rods, hatchet, steelyard, grindstone, clod crusher, swathe turner, carriage sack, telescope ladder, 10-tooth rake, washing clogs, hay tedder, tumbling rake, billhook, paint pot, brush, hoe, and so on. What improvements might subsequently be introduced? A rabbitry and fowl run, a dovecote, a botanical conservatory, 2 hammocks, ladies and gentlemen, a sundial shaded and sheltered by laburnum or lilac trees, an exotically harmonically accorded Japanese tinkle gate bell affixed to the left lateral gate post, a capacious water butt, a lawnmower with side delivery and grass box, a lawn sprinkler with hydraulic hose. What facilities of transit were desirable? When city-bound, frequent connection by train or tram from their respective intermediate station or terminal. When country-bound, velocipedes, a chainless freewheel roadster cycle with side basket car attached or draft conveyance, a donkey with wicker trap, or smart phaeton with good working solidungular cob, roan gelding, 14 hands. What might be the name of this erigible or erected residence? Bloom Cottage, St. Leopold's, Flowerville. Could Bloom of 7 Eccles Street foresee Bloom of Flowerville? In loose all-wool garments with Harris tweed cap, price 8 and 6, and useful garden boots with elastic gussets and watering can, planting aligned young fir trees, syringing, pruning, staking, sowing hayseed, trundling a weed-laden wheelbarrow, without excessive fatigue, at sunset amid the scent of new-mown hay, ameliorating the soil, multiplying wisdom, achieving longevity. What syllabus of intellectual pursuits was simultaneously possible? Snapshot photography, comparative study of religions, folklore relative to various amatory and superstitious practices, contemplation of the celestial constellations. What lighter recreations? Outdoor, garden and field work, cycling on level macadamized causeways, ascents of moderately high hills, natation in secluded fresh water and unmolested river boating in secure wherry or light carnival with kedge anchor on reaches free from weirs and rapids, period of estivation, vespertinal perambulation or equestrian circumpression with inspection of sterile landscape and contrastingly agreeable cottages fires of smoking peat turves, period of hibernation. Indoor discussion in tepid security of unsolved historical and criminal problems, lecture of unexpurgated exotic erotic masterpieces, house carpentry with toolbox containing hammer, awl, nails, screws, tin tacks, gimlet, tweezers, bullnose plane, and turn screw. Might he become a gentleman farmer of field produce and livestock? Not impossibly, with 1 or 2 stripper cows, 1 pike of upland hay, and requisite farming implements, for example, an end-to-end churn, a turnip pulper, etc. What would be his civic functions and social status among the country families and landed gentry? Arranged successively in ascending powers of hierarchical order, that of gardener, groundsman, cultivator, breeder, and at the zenith of his career, resident magistrate or justice of the peace, with a family crest and coat of arms and appropriate classical motto, Semper Paratus, duly recorded in the court directory, Bloom, Leopold P., MP, PC, KP, LLD, honoris causa, Bloomville, Dundrum, and mentioned in court and fashionable intelligence, Mr. and Mrs. Leopold Bloom have left Kingstown for England. What course of action did he outline for himself in such capacity? A course that lay between undue clemency and excessive rigor, the dispensation in a heterogeneous society of arbitrary classes incessantly rearranged in terms of greater and lesser social inequality, of unbiased, homogeneous, indisputable justice, tempered with mitigants of the widest possible latitude, but exactable to the uttermost farthing, with confiscation of estate, real and personal, to the crown. Loyal to the highest constituted power in the land, actuated by an innate love of rectitude, his aims would be the strict maintenance of public order, the repression of many abuses, though not of all simultaneously, every measure of reform or retrenchment being a preliminary solution to be contained by fluxion in the final solution. The upholding of the letter of the law, common, statute, and law merchant, against all traversers in coven and trespassers acting in contravention of bylaws and regulations, all resuscitators by trespass and petty larceny of kindlings of Venville rights, obsolete by desuetude, all orotund instigators of international persecution, all perpetrators of international animosities, all menial molesters of domestic conviviality, all recalcitrant violators of domestic connubiality.
My name is Patrick Macmanus, and I am coming to you here from Paris, France. And if you look just behind me here, you will see the original, actually that's not true, the second location of Shakespeare & Co., but this was the Shakespeare & Co. in which James Joyce first published Ulysses. So I apologize in advance for any audio issues, but I'm hoping that where we are and the location supplants any of that. I also want to say that Jack Dalton, who is one of the preeminent scholars of James Joyce's Ulysses, said that there are approximately 2,000 errors within Ulysses, many of which were purposeful, some of which were not. I assure you that any of my errors are simply because it is me. And so with that, prove that he had loved rectitude from his earliest youth. To Master Percy Apjohn at high school in 1880, he had divulged his disbelief in the tenets of the Irish Protestant Church, to which his father, Rudolf Virag, later Rudolf Bloom, had been converted from the Israelitic faith and communion in 1865 by the Society for Promoting Christianity at the epoch of and with a view to his matrimony in 1888. To Daniel McGrain and Francis Wade in 1882 during a juvenile friendship terminated by the premature emigration of the former, he had advocated during nocturnal perambulations the political theory of colonial,
in other words, Canadian expansion, and the evolutionary theories of Charles Darwin expounded in The Descent of Man and the Origin of Species. In 1885, he had publicly expressed his adherence to the collective and national economic program advocated by James Fenton Lawler, John Fisher Murray, John Mitchell, J.F.X. O'Brien, and others, the agrarian policy of Michael Davitt, the constitutional agitation of Charles Stewart Parnell, MP for Cork City, the program of peace, retrenchment, and reform of William Ewart Gladstone, MP for Midlothian, and in support of his political convictions, had climbed up into a secure position amid the ramifications of a tree on Northumberland Road to see the entrance, this is February 2nd, 1888, into the capital of a demonstrative torchlight procession of 20,000 torchbearers divided into 120 trade corporations bearing 2,000 torches in escort of the Marquess of Ripon and John Morley. How much and how did he propose to pay for this country residence? Well, as per prospectus of the Industrious Foreign Acclimatized Nationalized Friendly State-Aided Building Society, Incorporated 1874, a maximum of £60 per annum, being 1/6 of an assured income derived from gilt-edged securities, representing a 5% simple interest on capital of £1,200, estimate of price at 20 years purchase, of which 1/3 to be paid on acquisition and the balance in the form of annual rent, that is £800, plus 2.5% interest on the same, repayable quarterly in equal annual installments until extinction of amortization of loan advanced for purchase within a period of 20 years, amounting to an annual rental of £64, head rent included, the title deeds to remain in possession of the lender or lenders with a saving clause envisaging forced sale, foreclosure, and mutual compensation in the event of protracted failure to pay the terms assigned, otherwise the message to become the absolute property of the tenant occupier upon expiry of the period of years stipulated. What rapid but insecure means to opulence might facilitate immediate purchase? A private wireless telegraph which would transmit by dot and dash system the result of a national equine handicap, flat or steeplechase of 1 or more miles and furlongs won by an outsider at odds of 50 to 1 at 3 hours, 8 minutes p.m. at Ascot, Greenwich time. The message being received and available for betting purposes in Dublin at 2:59 p.m. Dunsink time. The unexpected discovery of an object of great monetary value, precious stone, valuable adhesive, or unpressed postage stamp, 7 shilling, mauve, imperforate, Hamburg, 1866. 4 pence, rose, blue paper, preferate, Great Britain, 1855. 1 franc, stone, official, rouletted, diagonal surcharge, Luxembourg, 1878. Antique dynastical ring, unique relic, in unusual repositories or by unusual means, from the air, dropped by an eagle in flight, by fire amid the carbonized remains of an incendiated edifice, in the sea, amid flotsam, jetsam, lagan, and derelict, on earth, in the gizzard of a commensable fowl. A Spanish prisoner's donation of a distant treasure of valuables or specie or bullion lodged with a solvent banking corporation 100 years previously at 5% compound interest at a collective worth of £5 million sterling. Contract with an inconsiderate contractee for the delivery of 32 consignments of some given commodity in consideration of cash payment on delivery at the initial rate of 1/4 pence to be increased constantly in the geometrical progression of 2. 1/4, 1/2, 1 pence, 2 pence, 4 pence, 8 pence, 1 shilling, 4 pence, 2 shilling, 8 pence to 32 terms. A prepared scheme based on a study of the laws of probability to break the bank at Monte Carlo. A solution of the secular problem of the quadrature of the circle government premium, £1 million sterling. Was vast wealth acquirable through industrial channels? The reclamation of dunams of waste ordinary soil proposed in the prospectus of Agendat Nataim, Bleibterstrasse, Berlin was 15th by the cultivation of orange plantations and melon fields and reforestation, the utilization of waste paper, fells of sewer rodents, human excrement possessing chemical properties in view of the vast production of the first, vast number of the second, and immense quantity of the third. Every normal human being of average vitality and appetite producing annually, canceling byproducts of water, a sum total of 80 pounds mixed animal and vegetable diet to be multiplied by 4,386,035, the total population of Ireland, according to the census returns of 1901.
Were there schemes of wider scope? A scheme to be formulated and submitted for approval to the harbour commissioners for the exploitation of white coal, hydraulic power, obtained by hydroelectric plant at peak of tide at Dublin Bar, or at head of water at Pulapuka or Powerscourt, or catchment basins of main streams for the economic production of 500,000 WHP of electricity. A scheme to enclose the peninsular delta of the North Bull at Dalymount and erect on the space of the foreland, used for golf links and rifle ranges, an asphalted esplanade with casinos, booths, shooting galleries, hotels, boarding houses, reading rooms, establishments for mixed bathing. A scheme for the use of dog vans and goat vans for the delivery of early morning milk. A scheme for the development of Irish tourist traffic in and around Dublin by means of petrol-propelled riverboats, plying in the fluvial fairway between Island Bridge and Ringsend, Sherrabanks, narrow-gauge local railways, and pleasure steamers for coastwise navigation. 10 shillings per person per day, guide trilingual included. A scheme for the repristination of passenger and goods traffics over Irish waterways when freed from weed beds. A scheme to connect by tram line the Cattle Market, North Circular Road and Prussia Street, with the Quays, Sheriff Street, Lower and East Wall, parallel with the Link Line railway laid in conjunction with the Great Southern and Western Railway line between the Cattle Park, Liffey Junction, and terminus of Midland Great Western Railway, 43 to 45, North Wall, in proximity to the terminal stations or Dublin branches of Great Central Railway, Midland Railway of England, City of Dublin Steam Packet Company, Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Company, Dublin and Glasgow Steam Packet Company, Glasgow, Dublin and Londonderry Steam Packet Company, Laird Line, British and Irish Steam Packet Company, Dublin and Morecambe Steamers, London and North Western Railway Company, Dublin Port and Docks Board landing sheds and transit sheds of Palgrave, Murphy and Company, steamship owners, agents for steamers from Mediterranean, Spain, Portugal, France, Belgium and Holland, and for Liverpool Underwriters Association, the cost of acquired rolling stock for animal transport and of additional mileage operated by the Dublin United Tramways Company, Limited, to be covered by grazier's fees. Positing what protasis with the contraction for such several schemes become a natural and necessary apodosis. Given a guarantee equal to the sum sought, the support by deed of gift and transfer vouchers during donor's lifetime, or by bequest after donor's painless extinction, of eminent financiers, Blum Pasha, Rothschild, Guggenheim, Hirsch, Montefiore, Morgan, Rockefeller, possessing fortunes in 6 figures, amassed during a successful life, and joining capital with opportunity, the thing required was done. What eventuality would render him independent of such wealth? The independent discovery of a gold seam of inexhaustible ore. For what reason did he meditate on schemes so difficult of realization? It was one of his axioms that similar meditations, or the automatic relation to himself of a narrative concerning himself, or tranquil recollection of the past, when practiced habitually before retiring for the night, alleviated fatigue, and produced, as a result, sound repose and renovated vitality. His justifications? As a physicist, he had learned that of the 70 years of complete human life, at least 2/7, viz., 20 years, are passed in sleep. As a philosopher, he knew that at the termination of any allotted life, only an infinitesimal part of any person's desires has been realized. As a physiologist, he believed in the artificial placation of malignant agencies, chiefly operative during somnolence. What did he fear? The committal of homicide or suicide during sleep by an aberration of the light of reason, the incommensurable categorical intelligence situated in the cerebral convolutions. What were habitually his final meditations? Of some one sole unique advertisement to cause passers to stop and wonder, a poster novelty with all extraneous accretions excluded, reduced to its simplest and most efficient terms, not exceeding the span of casual vision and congruous with the velocity of modern life.
I'm Colin Bailey, the director of the Morgan Library Museum, and we are in the magnificent East Room of Morgan's Library. In March 2018, Sean and Mary Kelly gave the Morgan their outstanding collection of rare James Joyce material, some 350 items, including 4 copies of the first edition of Ulysses. 4 years later, between June and October 2022, we organised an exhibition at the Morgan celebrating 100 years of James Joyce's Ulysses. And this was curated by Colin Toybin in association with our curators Sheelagh Bevan and Philip Palmer, with a catalogue edited by Colin with 10 essays and including an interview with Sean and Mary Kelly. I have 2 editions from the Morgan here, Matisse's illustrated edition and one of Sean Kelly's beloved first editions. We pick up towards the conclusion of episode 17, Ithaca. It's just after 2:30 in the morning, and in fact it's June 17th. Stephen Dedalus has departed the Bloom house at 7 Eccles Street. Leopold Bloom, alone in his front parlour as he prepares for bed, carefully examines the contents of a chest of drawers. The chapter is crafted in the style of a catechism, with 309 questions, each methodically, meticulously answered. What did the first drawer unlocked contain? A Vere Foster's handwriting copybook, property of Millicent Bloom, certain pages of which bore diagram drawings marked Papley, which showed a large globular head with 5 hairs erect, 2 eyes in profile, the trunk full front with 3 large buttons, a triangular foot. 2 fading photographs of Queen Alexandra of England and of Maud Branscombe, actress and professional beauty. A Yuletide card bearing on it a pictorial representation of a parasitic plant, the legend Misbah, the date Christmas 1892, the name of the senders from Mr. and Mrs. Comerford, the versicle, may this Yuletide bring to thee joy and peace and welcome glee. A butt of red, partly liquefied sealing wax obtained from the stores department of Messrs. Healy's Limited, 89, 90 and 91 Dame Street. A box containing the remainder of a gross of gilt J pen nibs, obtained from same department of same firm. An old sand glass which rolled containing sand which rolled. A sealed prophecy, never unsealed, written by Leopold Bloom in 1886 concerning the consequences of the passing into law of William Ewart Gladstone's Home Rule Bill of 1886, never passed into law. 2 Bazaar ticket, number 2004, of S. Kevin's Charity Fair, price 6pence, 100 prizes. An infantile epistle dated small m Monday, reading, capital P Papley, capital H, how are you? None of interrogation, capital I, I am very well, full stop, new paragraph, signature, with flourishes, capital M, Millie, no stop. A cameo brooch, property of Ellen Bloom, born Higgins, deceased. 3 typewritten letters, addressee Henry Fowler, care of P.O. Box, Westland Row, addresser Martha Clifford, care of P.O. Dolphin's Barn. The transliterated name and address of the addresser of the 3 letters in reversed alphabetic, boustrophodontic, punctuated quadrilinear cryptogram. Vowels suppressed. N, full stop, IGS, full stop, slash, WI, full stop, UU, full stop, OX, slash, W, full stop, OKS, full stop, MH, slash, Y, full stop, IM. A press cutting from an English weekly periodical, Modern Society, subject, corporal chastisement in girls' schools. A pink ribbon, which had festooned an Easter egg in the year 1899. 2 partly uncoiled rubber preservatives with reserve pockets, purchased by post from Box 32PO, Charing Cross, London, WC1. 1 pack of 1 dozen cream-laid envelopes and faint-ruled notepaper, watermarked, now reduced by 3. Some associated Austrian-Hungarian coins. 2 coupons of the Royal and Privileged Hungarian Lottery, a low-power magnifying glass. 2 erotic photographs showing A. Buckle coition between nude senorita, rere presentation, superior position, and nude torero, 4 presentation, inferior position. B. Anal violation by male religious, fully clothed, eyes abject, of female religious, partly clothed, eyes direct, purchased by post from Box 32PO, Charing Cross, London, WC. A press cutting of receipt for renovation of an old tan boots. 21 pence adhesive stamp. Lavender of the reign of Queen Victoria. A chart of measurement of Leopold Bloom compiled before, during and after 2 months of consecutive use of Sandow Whiteley's Pulley exercise, men's 15 shillings, athletes 20 shillings, viz. Chest 28 inches and 29.5 inches, biceps 9 inches and 10 inches, forearm 8.5 and 9 inches, thigh 10 inches and 12 inches, calf 11 inches and 12 inches. 1 prospectus of the Wonder Worker, the world's greatest remedy for rectal complaints, direct from Wonder Worker, Coventry House, South Place, London, EC, addressed to Mrs. L. Bloom, with brief accompanying note commencing. Dear Madam, quote the textual terms in which the prospectus claimed advantages for this thaumaturgic remedy. It heals and soothes while you sleep. In case of trouble in breaking wind, assists nature in the most formidable way, ensuring instant relief in discharge of gases, keeping parts clean and free, natural action, an initial outlay of 7 and 6 making a new man of you and life worth living. Ladies find Wonder Worker especially useful. A pleasant surprise when they note delightful result, like a cool drink of fresh spring water on a sultry summer's day. Recommend it to your lady and gentleman friends. Lasts a lifetime. Insert a long round end. Wonder Worker. Were these testimonials? Numerous. From clergyman, British naval officer, well-known author, city man, hospital nurse, lady, mother of 5, absent-minded beggar. How did absent-minded beggars' concluding testimonial conclude? What a pity the government did not apply our men with wonder workers during the South African campaign. What a relief it would have been. What object did Bloom add to this collection of objects? A 4th typewritten letter received by Henry Fowler, let HF BLB from Martha Clifford, find MC. What pleasant reflection accompanied this action? The reflection that, apart from the letter in question, his magnetic face, form and address had been favourably received during the course of the preceding day by a wife, Mrs. Josephine Breen, born Josie Powell, a nurse, Miss Callan, Christian name unknown, a maid, Gertrude, Gertie, family name unknown. What possibility suggested itself? The possibility of exercising virile power of fascination in the most immediate future after an expensive repast in a private apartment in the company of an elegant courtesan of corporal beauty, moderately mercenary, variously instructed, a lady by origin.
I'm Sheelagh Bevan at the Morgan Library and Museum in New York. I'm going to take you through our exhibition celebrating 100 years of Ulysses, where we were able to combine our own collections with those of the great American institutions, including the University at Buffalo. What did the second drawer contain? Documents, the birth certificate of Leopold Paula Bloom, an endowment assurance policy of £500 in the Scottish Widows Assurance Society, intestated Millicent Millie Bloom, coming into force at 25 years as with profit policy of £430, £462 and 10, and £500 at 60 years or death, 65 years or death and death, respectively, or with profit policy paid up of £299 and 10, together with cash payment of £133 and 10 at option. A bank passbook issued by the Ulster Bank, College Green branch, showing statement of AC for half year ending 31 December 1903, balance in depositor's favour, £18 14 and 6, £18 14 shillings and 6 sterling. Net personalty, certificate of possession of £900 Canadian 4% inscribed government stock, free of stamp duty, dockets of the Catholic Cemeteries Glasnevin Committee, relative to a grave plot purchased, a local press cutting concerning change of name by deed poll. Quote the textual terms of this notice. I, Rudolf Virag, now resident at No. 52 Clanbrassil Street, Dublin, formerly of Szombathely in the Kingdom of Hungary, hereby give notice that I have assumed and intend henceforth upon all occasions and at all times to be known by the name of Rudolf Bloom. What other objects relative to Rudolf Bloom, born Virag, were in the second drawer? An indistinct daguerreotype of Rudolf Virag and his father, Leopold Virag, executed in the year 1852 in the portrait atelier of their respectively first and second cousin, Stefan Virag of Székesfehérvár, Hungary. An ancient Haggadah book in which a pair of horn-rimmed convex spectacles inserted marked the passage of Thanksgiving in the ritual prayers for Pesach, Passover. A photocard of the Queen's Hotel, Ennis proprietor, Rudolf Bloom, an envelope addressed to my dear son Leopold. What fractions of phrases did the lecture of those 5 whole words evoke? Tomorrow will be a week that I received, "It is no use, Leopold, to be with your dear mother. That is not more to stand to her. All for me is out. Be kind to Athos, Leopold. My dear son, always of me. Das Herz, Gott dein." What reminiscences of a human subject suffering from progressive melancholia did these objects evoke in Bloom? An old man, widower, unkempt of hair, in bed with head covered, sighing. An infirm dog, Athos, aconite, resorted to by increasing doses of grains and scruples as a palliative of recrudescent neuralgia. The face in death of a septuagenarian, suicide by poison. Why did Bloom experience a sentiment of remorse? Because in immature impatience he had treated with disrespect certain beliefs and practices, as the prohibition of the use of flesh meat and milk at one meal, the hebdomadary symposium of incoordinately abstract, perfervidly concrete, mercantile, coex-religionist ex-compatriots, the circumcision of male infants, the supernatural character of Judaic scripture, the ineffability of the Tetragrammaton, the sanctity of the Sabbath. How did these beliefs and practices now appear to him? Not more rational than they had then appeared, not less rational than other beliefs and practices now appeared. What first reminiscence had he of Rudolf Bloom, deceased? Rudolf Bloom, deceased, narrated to his son Leopold Bloom, age 6, a retrospective arrangement of migrations and settlements in and between Dublin, London, Florence, Milan, Vienna, Budapest, Szombathely, with statements of satisfaction, his grandfather having seen Maria Theresia, Empress of Austria, Queen of Hungary, with commercial advice, having taken care of pence, the pounds having taken care of themselves. Leopold Bloom, age 6, had accompanied these narrations by constant consultation of a geographical map of Europe, political, and by suggestions for the establishment of affiliated business premises in the various centers mentioned. Had time equally but differently obliterated the memory of these migrations in narrator and listener? In narrator, by the access of years and in consequence of the use of narcotic toxin; in listener, by the access of years and in consequence of the action of distraction upon vicarious experiences. What idiosyncrasies of the narrator were concomitant products of amnesia? Occasionally he ate without having previously removed his hat. Occasionally he drank voraciously the juice of gooseberry fool from an inclined plate. Occasionally he removed from his lips the traces of food by means of a lacerated envelope or other accessible fragment of paper. What two phenomena of senescence were more frequent? The myopic digital calculation of coins, eructation consequent upon repletion. What object offered partial consolation for these reminiscences? The endowment policy, the bank passbook, the certificate of the possession of scrip.
Hi, I'm Mike Griffin at the University of Limerick, Ireland. I teach English and I have occasionally taught James Joyce's Ulysses over the last 20 years. I'm speaking to you from Ennis in County Clare, not far from Limerick, and I'm just a couple of hundred metres away from the Queen's Hotel, which of course is where Rudolf Virag, Leopold Bloom's father, committed suicide in the 1880s. And that's one of the few references to this town in James Joyce's Ulysses. And I'm going to be reading from the parlour section of the Ithaca episode, and I'm reading from a facsimile of the 1922 edition. Reduce Bloom by cross-multiplication of reverses of fortune, from which these supports protected him, and by elimination of all positive values to a negligible, negative, irrational, unreal quantity. Successively, in descending helotic order. Poverty, that of the outdoor hawker of imitation jewellery. The dun for the recovery of bad and doubtful debts. The poor rate and deputy cess collector. Mendicancy, that of the fraudulent bankrupt with negligible assets paying 1 4 in the pound. Sandwichman, distributor of throwaways, nocturnal vagrant. Insinuating sycophant, maimed sailor, blind stripling, superannuated bailiff's man, marfeast, lick plate, spoilsport, pig tank, eccentric public laughingstock, seated on bench of public park under discarded perforated umbrella. Destitution, the inmate of Old Man's House, Royal Hospital, Kilmainham. The inmate of Simpson's Hospital for reduced but respectable men permanently disabled by gout or want of sight. Nadir of misery, the aged, impotent, disfranchised, rate-supported, moribund, lunatic pauper, with which attendant indignities. The unsympathetic indifference of previously amiable females, the contempt of muscular males, the acceptance of fragments of bread, the simulated ignorance of casual acquaintances, the latration of illegitimate, unlicensed vagabond dogs, the infantile discharge of decomposed vegetable missiles, worth little or nothing, nothing or less than nothing. By what could such a situation be precluded? By decease, change of state. By departure, change of place. Which preferably? The latter, by the line of least resistance. What considerations rendered it not entirely undesirable? Constant cohabitation impeding mutual toleration of personal defects. The habit of independent purchase increasingly cultivated. The necessity to counteract by impermanent sojourn the permanence of arrest. What considerations rendered it not irrational? The parties concerned uniting had increased and multiplied, which being done, offspring produced and educed to maturity, the parties, if not disunited, were obliged to reunite for increase and multiplication, which was absurd, to form by reunion the original couple of uniting parties, which was impossible. What considerations rendered it desirable? The attractive character of certain localities in Ireland and abroad, as represented in general geographical maps of polychrome design or in special ordnance survey charts by employment of scale numerals and hachures. In Ireland, the cliffs of Moher, the windy wilds of Connemara, Lough Neagh with submerged petrified city, the Giant's Causeway, Fort Camden and Fort Carlisle, the Golden Vale of Tipperary, the islands of Arran, the pastures of Royal Meath, Bridget's Elm in Kildare, the Queen's Island shipyard in Belfast, the Salmon Leap, the lakes of Killarney. Abroad, Ceylon, with Spice Garden supplying tea to Thomas Kernan, agent for Pulbrook, Robertson and Co., 2 Mincing Lane, London, EC 5, Dame Street, Dublin. Jerusalem, the Holy City, with Mosque of Omar and Gate of Damascus, goal of aspiration. The Straits of Gibraltar, the unique birthplace of Marion Tweedy. The Parthenon, containing statues, nude Grecian divinities. The Wall Street money market, which controlled international finance. The Plaza de Toros at La Linea, Spain, where O'Hara of the Camerons had slain the bull. Niagara, over which no human being had passed with impunity. The land of the Eskimos, eaters of soap. The forbidden country of Tibet, from which no traveller returns. The Bay of Naples, to see which was to die. The Dead Sea. Under what guidance? Following what signs? At sea, septentrional, by night the pole star, located at the point of intersection of the right line from beta to alpha, in Ursa Major produced and divided externally at omega, and the hypotenuse of the right angle triangle formed by the line alpha omega so produced on the line alpha delta of Ursa Major. On land, meridional, a bispherical moon, reveated in imperfect varying phases of lunation through the posterior interstice of the imperfectly occluded skirt of a Carnot's negligent perambulating female, a pillar of the cloud by day.
My name is Adair, and I am in Queens in New York City. What public advertisement would divulge the occultation of the departed? £5 reward. Lost, stolen, or strayed from his residence, 7 Eccles Street, missing gen about 40, answering to the name of Bloom, Leopold, Poldy. Height 5 feet 9.5 inches, full build, olive complexion, may have since grown a beard, when last seen was wearing a black suit. Above sum will be paid for information leading to his discovery. What universal binomial denominations would be his as entity and non-entity? Assumed by any, or known to none? Every man, or no man? What tributes his? Honor and gifts of strangers, the friends of every man. A nymph, immortal, beauty, the bride of no man. Would the departed never, nowhere, nohow reappear? Ever would he wander, self-compelled, to the extreme limit of his cometary orbit, beyond the fixed stars and variable suns and telescopic planets, astronomical waifs and strays, to the extreme boundary of space, passing from land to land, among peoples, amid events. Somewhere, imperceptibly, he would hear and somehow, reluctantly, sun-compelled, obey the summons of recall, whence, disappearing from the constellation of the Northern Crown, he would somehow reappear, reborn above the delta in the constellation of Cassiopeia, and after incalculable eons of peregrination, return, an estranged avenger, a wreaker of justice on malefactors, a dark crusader, a sleeper, awakened, with financial resources, by supposition, surpassing those of Rothschild or of the Silver King. What would render such return irrational? An unsatisfactory equation between an exodus and return in time through reversible space and an exodus and return in space through irreversible time. What play of forces, including inertia, rendered departure undesirable? The lateness of the hour, rendering procrastinatory. The obscurity of the night, rendering invisible. The uncertainty of thoroughfares, rendering perilous. The necessity for repose, obviating movement. The proximity of an occupied bed, obviating research. The anticipation of warmth, human. Tempered with coolness, linen. Obviating desire and rendering desirable. the statue of Narcissus, sound without echo, desired desire. What advantages were possessed by an occupied, as distinct from an unoccupied, bed? The removal of nocturnal solitude, the superior quality of human, mature female, to inhuman, hot water jar calefaction, the stimulation of matutinal contact, the economy of mangling done on the premises in the case of trousers accurately folded and placed lengthwise between spring mattress, striped, and the woolen mattress, biscuit section. What past consecutive causes, before rising pre-apprehended, of accumulated fatigue did Bloom, before rising, silently recapitulate? The preparation of breakfast, burnt offering, intestinal congestion and premeditative defecation, holy of holies, the bath, rite of John, the funeral, rite of Samuel, the advertisement of Alexander Keyes, Urim and Thummim, the unsubstantial lunch, rite of Melchizedek, the visit to museum and National Library, holy place, the book hunt along Bedford Row, Merchant's Arch, Wellington Quay, Simchat Torah, the music in the Ormond Hotel, Shira Shirim, the altercation with a truculent troglodyte in Bernard Kiernan's premises, Holocaust, a blank period of time including a car drive, a visit to a house of mourning, a leave-taking, wilderness, the eroticism produced by feminine exhibitionism, rite of Onan, the prolonged delivery of Mrs. Mina Purifoy, heave offering, the visit to the disorderly house of Mrs. Bella Cohen, 82 Tyrone Street, Lower, and subsequent brawl and chance medley in Beaver Street, Armageddon, nocturnal perambulation to and from the cabin's shelter, Butt Bridge, atonement. What self-imposed enigma did Bloom, about to rise, in order to go, so as to conclude, lest he should not conclude, involuntarily apprehend? The cause of a brief, sharp, unforeseen, heard, loud lone crack, emitted by the insentient material of a strain-veined timber table. What self-involved enigma did Bloom, risen, going, gathering multicolored, multiform, multitudinous garments, voluntarily apprehending, not comprehend? Who was Mackintosh? What self-evident enigma, pondered with desultory constancy during 30 years, did Bloom now, having effected natural obscurity with the extinction of artificial light, silently, suddenly, comprehend? Where was Moses when the candle went out?
Happy Bloomsday, everyone. I'm Philip Palmer. I'm the Robert H. Taylor Curator here at the Morgan Library and Museum, where we have our big exhibition, 100 Years of James Joyce's Ulysses, which opened a few weeks ago. I'm here in the gallery. I'm in front of one of my favorite objects in the show, one of the proof sheets for the Cyclops episode, covered with Joyce's annotations and corrections, maddening the French printers, of course, with all of his late additions to the novel. Famously, he wrote around a third of the book in proof, and this is one of these great artifacts that shows that process. So I'm here today to read a passage from one of my favorite episodes, Ithaca, and I have a special copy of Ulysses with me. This is a copy of the Gabler edition that I had in college when I took a course on Ulysses with Weldon Thornton, author of Allusions in Ulysses. And I'm going to read a passage from Ithaca now, in a special place on a special day. What imperfections in a perfect day did Bloom, walking, charged with collected articles of recently divested male-wearing apparel, silently, successively enumerate? A provisional failure to obtain renewal of an advertisement, to obtain a certain quantity of tea from Thomas Kernan, agent for Pulbrook, Robertson and Company, 5 Dame Street, Dublin, and 2 Mincing Lane, London, EC. To certify the presence or absence of posterior rectal orifice in the case of Hellenic female divinities. To obtain admission, gratuitous or paid, to the performance of Leah by Mrs. Bandman Palmer at the Gaiety Theater, 46, 47, 48, 49 South King Street. What impression of an absent face did Bloom, arrested, silently recall? The face of her father, the late Major Brien Cooper Tweedy, Royal Dublin Fusiliers of Gibraltar and Rehoboth, Dolphin's Barn. What recurrent impressions of the same were possible by hypothesis? Retreating at the terminus of the Great Northern Railway, Amiens Street, with constant uniform acceleration, along parallel lines meeting at infinity, it produced, along parallel lines reproduced from infinity, which constant uniform retardation at the terminus of the Great Northern Railway, Amiens Street, returning. What miscellaneous effects of female personal wearing apparel were perceived by him? A pair of new inodorous half-silk black ladies' hose, a pair of new violet garters, a pair of outsized ladies' drawers of India mull, cut on generous lines, redolent of Apopanax, jessamine, and Marathis Turkish cigarettes, and containing a long, bright steel safety pin, folded curvilinear, a camisole of batiste with thin lace border, an accordion underskirt of blue silk moirette, all these objects being disposed irregularly on the top of a rectangular trunk, quadruple battened, having capped corners with multicolored labels, initialed on its foreside in white lettering BCT, Brien Cooper Tweedy. What impersonal objects were perceived? A commode, one leg fractured, totally covered by square cretonne cutting, apple design, on which rested a lady's black straw hat. Orange-keyed ware bought of Henry Price, basket, fancy goods, chinaware, and ironmongery manufacturer, 212223 Moore Street, disposed irregularly on the washstand and floor, and consisting of basin, soap dish, and brush tray on the washstand together, pitcher and night article on the floor, separate. Bloom's acts? He deposited the articles of clothing on a chair, removed his remaining articles of clothing, took from beneath the bolster at the head of the bed a folded long white nightshirt, inserted his head and arms into the proper apertures of the nightshirt, removed a pillow from the head of the foot of the bed, prepared the bed linen accordingly, and entered the bed. How? With circumspection, as invariably when entering an abode, his own or not his own. With solicitude, the snake spiral springs of the mattress being old, the brass quoits and pendant viper radii loose and tremulous under stress and strain. Prudently, as entering a lair or ambush of lust or adders. Lightly, the less to disturb. Reverently, the bed of conception and of birth, of consummation of marriage and of breach of marriage, of sleep and of death. What did his limbs, when gradually extended, encounter? New clean bed linen, additional odors, the presence of a human form, female, hers, the imprint of a human form, male, not his, some crumbs, some flakes of potted meat, recooked, which he removed. If he had smiled, why would he have smiled? To reflect that each one who enters imagines himself to be the first to enter, whereas he is always the last term of a preceding series, even if the first term of a succeeding one, each imagining himself to be first, last only and alone, whereas he is neither first nor last, nor only nor alone, in a series originating in and repeated to infinity. What preceding series? Assuming Mulvey to be the first of his series, Penrose, Bartell D'Arcy, Professor Goodwin, Jules Mastiansky, John Henry Minton, Father Bernard Corrigan, a farmer at the Royal Dublin Society's horse show, Maggot O'Reilly, Matthew Dillon, Valentine Blake Dillon, Lord Mayor of Dublin, Christopher Callanan, Lenehan, an Italian organ grinder, an unknown gentleman in the Gaiety Theater, Benjamin Dollard, Simon Dedalus, Andrew Pisser Burke, Joseph Cuff, Wisdom Healy, Alderman John Hooper, Dr. Francis Brady, Father Sebastian of Mount Argus, a bootblack at the General Post Office, Hugh E. Blazes Boylan, and so each and so on to no last term. Thank you for listening. Happy Bloomsday. See you, everyone. Please come see the exhibition.
I am John Bidwell, Curator Emeritus at the Morgan Library and Museum, reading at my home in Princeton, New Jersey. I am using the Hans Walter Gabler paperback edition. While working on the Morgan Ulysses exhibition, which has just opened, by the way, I noticed a mistake in this edition, a famous mistake, the missing period at the end of the Ithaca chapter. After all these years, the printers still can't get it right. The Ithaca episode is already hilarious, but for me, this gremlin is an additional delight. Now you know why at the end of the reading, I will supply the full stop. What were his reflections concerning the last member of this series and late occupant of the bed? Reflections on his vigor, a bounder. Corporal proportion, a bill sticker. Commercial ability, a bester. Impressionability, a boaster. Why, for the observer, impressionability in addition to vigor, corporal proportion, and commercial ability? Because he had observed with augmenting frequency in the preceding members of the same series the same concupiscence inflammably transmitted, first with alarm, then with understanding, then with desire, finally with fatigue, with alternating symptoms of epicene comprehension and apprehension. With what antagonistic sentiments were his subsequent reflections affected? Envy, jealousy, abnegation, equanimity. Envy? Of a bodily and mental male organism specially adapted for the superincumbent posture of energetic human copulation, an energetic piston and cylinder movement necessary for the complete satisfaction of a constant but not acute concupiscence resident in a bodily and mental female organism, passive but not obtuse. Jealousy? Because a nature full and volatile in its free state was alternately the agent and regent of attraction, because attraction between agents and regents at all instants varied, with inverse proportion of increase and decrease, with incessant circular extension and radial reentrance, because the controlled contemplation of the fluctuation of attraction produced, if desired, a fluctuation of pleasure. Abnegation? In virtue of A, acquaintance initiated in September 1903 in the establishment of George Messias, merchant, tailor, and outfitter, 5 Eden Quay. B, hospitality, extended and received in kind, reciprocated and reappropriated in person. C, comparative youth, subject to impulses of ambition and magnanimity, collegial altruism and amorous egoism. D, extraracial attraction, intraracial inhibition, supraracial prerogative. E, an imminent provincial musical tour, common current expenses, net proceeds divided. Equanimity? As unnatural as any and every natural act of a nature expressed or understood executed in a natured nature by natural creatures in accordance with his, her, and their natured natures of dissimilar similarity, as not so calamitous as a cataclysmic annihilation of the planet in consequence of a collision with a dark sun, as less reprehensible than theft, highway robbery, cruelty to children and animals, obtaining money under false pretenses, forgery, embezzlement, misappropriation of public money, betrayal of public trust, malingering, mayhem, corruption of minors, criminal libel, blackmail, contempt of court, arson, treason, felony, mutiny on the high seas, trespass, burglary, jailbreaking, practice of unnatural vice, desertion from armed forces in the field, perjury, poaching, usury, intelligence with the king's enemies, impersonation, criminal assault, manslaughter, willful and premeditated murder, as not more abnormal than all other parallel processes of adaptation to altered conditions of existence, resulting in a reciprocal equilibrium between the bodily organism and its attendant circumstances, foods, beverages, acquired habits, indulged inclinations, significant disease, as more than inevitable, irreparable. Why more abnegation than jealousy, less envy than equanimity? From outrage matrimony to outrage adultery, there arose naught but outrage copulation. Yet the matrimonial violator of the matrimonially violated had not been outraged by the adulterous violator of the adulterously violated. What retribution, if any? Assassination? Never, as two wrongs do not make one right. Duel by combat? No. Divorce? Not now. Exposure by mechanical artifice? Automatic bed. Or individual testimony? Concealed ocular witnesses? Not yet. Suit for damages by legal influence or simulation of assault with evidence of injuries sustained? Self-inflicted. Not impossibly. Hush money by moral influence? Possibly. If any, positively, connivance, introduction of emulation, material, a prosperous rival agency of publicity, moral, a successful rival agent of intimacy. Depreciation, alienation, humiliation, separation, protecting the one separated from the other, protecting the separator from both. By what reflections did he, a conscience reactor against the void of incertitude, justify to himself his sentiments? The preordained frangibility of the hymen, the presupposed intangibility of the thing in itself, the incongruity and disproportion between the self-prolonging tension of the thing proposed to be done and the self-abbreviating relaxation of the thing done, the fallaciously inferred debility of the female, the muscularity of the male, the variations of ethical codes, the natural grammatical transition by inversion involving no alteration of sense of an aorist preterite preposition parsed as masculine subject, monosyllabic onomopoetic transitive verb with direct feminine object, from the active voice into its correlative aorist preterite proposition parsed as a feminine subject, auxiliary verb, and quasi-monosyllabic onomopoetic past participle with complementary masculine agent in the passive voice, the continued product of seminators by generation, the continual product of semen by distillation, the futility of triumph or protest or vindication, the inanity of extolled virtue, the lethargy of nescient matter, the apathy of the stars. In what final satisfaction did these antagonistic sentiments and reflections, reduced to their simplest forms, converge? Satisfaction at the ubiquity in eastern and western terrestrial hemispheres, in all habitable lands and islands explored or unexplored, the land of the midnight sun, the islands of the blessed, the Isles of Greece, the land of promise, of adipose anterior and posterior female hemispheres, redolent of milk and honey, and of excretory, sanguine, and seminal warmth, reminiscent of secular families of curves of amplitude, insusceptible of moods of impression, or of contrarieties of expression, expressive of immutable, mature animality. The visible signs of antisatisfaction: an approximate erection, a solicitous adversion, a gradual elevation, a tentative revelation, a silent contemplation. Then he kissed the plump, mellow, yellow, smellow melons of her rump, on each plump, melonous hemisphere in their mellow yellow furrow, with obscure, prolonged, provocative, meloninous osculation. The visible signs of post-satisfaction: a silent contemplation, a tentative volation, a gradual abasement, a solicitous aversion, a proximate erection. What followed this silent action? Somnolent invocation, less somnolent recognition, incipient excitation, catechetical interrogation. With what modifications did the narrator reply to this interrogation? Negative. He omitted to mention the clandestine correspondence between Martha Clifford and Henry Flower, the public altercation at, in, and in the vicinity of the licensed premises of Bernard Kiernan and Company Limited, 8, 9, and 10 Little Britain Street. The erotic provocation and response thereto caused by the exhibitionism of Gertrude, Gertie, surname unknown. Positive. He included mention of a performance by Mrs. Bandman Palmer of Leah at the Gaiety Theatre, 46, 47, 48, 49 South King Street, an invitation to supper at Wynn's, Murphy's, Hotel, 35, 36, and 37 Lower Abbey Street. A volume of peccaminous pornographical tendency entitled Sweets of Sin, anonymous author, a gentleman of fashion, a temporary concussion caused by a falsely calculated movement in the course of a post-senile gymnastic display, the victim, since completely recovered, being Stephen Daedalus, professor and author, eldest surviving son of Simon Daedalus, of no fixed occupation, an aeronautical feat executed by him, narrator, in the presence of a witness, the professor and author aforesaid, with promptitude of decision and gymnastic flexibility. Was the narration otherwise unaltered by modifications? Absolutely. Which event or person emerged as the salient point of his narration? Stephen Daedalus, professor and author. What limitations of activity and inhibitions of conjugal rights were perceived by listener and narrator concerning themselves during the course of this intermittent and increasingly more laconic narration? By the listener, a limitation of fertility, inasmuch as marriage had been celebrated 1 calendar month after the 18th anniversary of her birth, 8 September 1870, viz. 8 October, and consummated on the same date with female issue born 15 June 1889, having been anticipatorily consummated on the 10th of September of the same year, and complete carnal intercourse with ejaculation of semen within the natural female organ, having last taken place 5 weeks previous, viz. 27 November 1893, to the birth on 29 December 1893 of second and only male issue, deceased 9 January 1894, aged 11 days. There remained a period of 10 years, 5 months, and 18 days, during which carnal intercourse had been incomplete without ejaculation of semen within the natural female organ. By the narrator, a limitation of activity, mental and corporal, inasmuch as complete mental intercourse between himself and the listener had not taken place since the consummation of puberty, indicated by catamenic hemorrhage of the female issue of narrator and listener, 15 September 1903. There remained a period of 9 months and 1 day, during which, in consequence of a pre-established natural comprehension in incomprehension between the consummated females, listener and issue, complete corporal liberty of action had been circumscribed. How? By various reiterated feminine interrogation concerning the masculine destination, whither, the place where, the time at which, the duration for which, the object with which, in the case of temporary absences, projected or affected. What moved visibly above the listeners and the narrator's invisible thoughts? The upcast reflection of a lamp and shade, an inconstant series of concentric circles of varying gradations of light and shadow. In what direction did listener and narrator lie. Listener, southeast by east. Narrator, northwest by west on the 53rd parallel of latitude north and 6th meridian of longitude west, and an angle of 45 degrees to the terrestrial equator. In what state of rest or motion? At rest, relatively to themselves and to each other, in motion, being each and both carried westward, forward, and reward, respectively, by the proper perpetual motion of the earth through ever-changing tracks of never-changing space. In what posture? Listener, reclined semilaterally, left hand under head, right leg extended in a straight line and resting on left leg, flexed in the attitude of Gaia Tellus, fulfilled, recumbent, big with seed. Narrator, reclined laterally, left, with right and left legs flexed, the index finger and thumb of the right hand resting on the bridge of the nose, in the attitude depicted in the snapshot photograph made by Percy Apjohn, the child-man weary, the man-child in the womb. Womb? Weary? He rests. He has traveled. With? Sinbad the sailor, and Tinbad the tailor, and Jinbad the jailer, and Winbad the whaler, and Ninbad the nailer, and Fidbad the failer, and Binbad the baler, and Pinbad the paler, and Minbad the mailer, and Hinbad the hailer, and Rinbad the railer, and Dinbad the caler, and Vinbad the quailer, and Linbad the yaler, and Zinban the staler. When? Going to dark bed, there was a square round Sinbad the sailor, rocks, ox, egg, in the middle of the bed, of all the ox, of the rocks, of dark and bad, the bright daler. Where? Period.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of The Colophon and our Centennial reading of Ulysses from Thornwillow Press. Be sure to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, and please consider supporting us by visiting our website, www.thornwillow.com. Your help makes this and all our endeavors possible.